in any way possible to right these wrongs. I love when constituents don't only point out what's wrong, but stand up and say, I will be in service. Let me know how I can help. Your voice is helping tonight. Speaking to these issues is helping tonight. I know my Senate colleague is here. If she has a question, I will yield while retaining the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleague from New Jersey for yielding for a question. And I want to just start by thanking my colleague for one of my dearest friends in the Senate for using his voice in such a powerful way over the many, many hours that you've been holding the Senate floor. And I know you well enough to know that you are not doing this because of your belief in the power of your voice. You are doing this because of your belief in the power of all of the voices that you've been amplifying all through the night, and your belief of the importance that the millions of Americans who are so frightened and concerned and horrified by what they see this administration doing, and wanting to feel like there is somebody here that is fighting for them and that is listening to them. And the way in which you are reading these letters today and all through the night, Senator Booker, I think is a tribute to your respect for all of those Americans. And so I'm so grateful for that. And I wanted to take a moment, if I could, to ask you to yield for a question related to what you've been talking about. You know, and I certainly agree with you that these are not normal times in our nation, and as elected officials, it is our duty to speak up and to fight back against the abuses and the overreach of this administration, and to raise up our voices, raise up the voices of our constituents who, as I said, are both frightened and furious about what's happening. So my question to you, Senator Booker, is about some of the Trump administration's recent actions regarding immigration. And my question is in three parts. First, I think that we can all agree that our current immigration system in this country is broken. It is not working well for anyone. It's not working well for American businesses that depend on a global talent pool. It is not working well for families who want to reunite with their loved ones. And it is not working well at all for those who seek refuge from persecution and believe in the promises that are carved into the Statue of Liberty. And to my colleague, I ask these questions and I think about these issues, about the shortcomings of our immigration system as a senator from Minnesota, where our meat processing sector relies so much on immigrant labor, where the University of Minnesota is a beacon for international students studying science and technology and agriculture, where the resorts in Minnesota rely on folks from all over the country to come and make them work, the little mom and pop 12-cabin operations up on lakes in northern Minnesota, and the manufacturers who rely on, as I said, the best and the brightest from all over the world coming to serve in our state and serving our economy. And I think we know, my colleague from New Jersey, that there have been real and serious bipartisan attempts at comprehensive immigration reform debated in this body. And while I might not have agreed with everything in these proposals, I suspect you might not as well, I think we both, I'm sure, strongly believe that immigration is an issue that merits real debate and real policy solutions. Our colleague who is here on the floor with us this morning, Senator Murphy from Connecticut, has worked so hard to find real bipartisan solutions. And I believe that comprehensive immigration reform needs to ensure our national security. It needs to provide a fair and workable path for immigrants who want to come and contribute to the American dream, which is what truly makes this country great. But here's the rub. The Trump administration's recent actions show that they are not interested in serious policy reforms that would make Americans safer or make our immigration system work more efficiently and fairly. Instead, what I think we can see This president has prioritized using our immigration system as a tool to restrict First Amendment freedoms, to subvert due process, and to further weaken America's global standing with our allies and our regional partners as he seeks to emulate the authoritarian regimes that he so openly admires. There's just one example. In recent weeks, we've seen a number of international students targeted for arrest and deportation merely on the basis of their pro-Palestinian advocacy. Now, these are young people who played by all the rules. They've entered this country with permission in order to further their educations and have not been accused of or charged of any criminal activity. Their views on the war in Gaza may differ sharply from mine or others, but I believe that the First Amendment guarantees them the right to express those views without facing punishment or reprisal from our government. Nonetheless, the Trump administration has admitted that they are doing exactly that, seeking to punish lawfully present immigrants, in some cases even green card holders, because of the political views that they've expressed. The Secretary of State has invoked a rarely used section of statute that allows him to unilaterally designate for removal any alien who may cause, and I quote, potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. And if that's not enough, many of these arrests have been carried out in a manner that seems calculated to maximize fear and intimidation in immigrant and activist communities. Here's an example to my colleague for him to respond to. I want to take the case of the recent arrest of Rumaysa Özerkök, a Turkish graduate student at Tufts University, who was studying the relationship between child development and our social media saturated, globally connected world. She is here on a valid student visa. She is not accused of any crime. And by all accounts, she is a loved and valued member of the Tufts community. Her only purported offense was being one of 4 co-authors of an op-ed in the student newspaper that urged the administration of Tufts to engage with student calls to divest from businesses with ties to Israel and the IDF. And for that offense, her visa was revoked with no notice, and she was arrested on the street and spirited more than 1,500 miles away, which is likely a violation of a judge's order to await her probable deportation. And I'm sure many of my colleagues, including my colleague from New Jersey, has seen the video of her arrest, which was captured by a neighbor's security camera, and it is utterly chilling. She is surrounded by officers in plain clothes with no visible insignia, no markings at all on their clothing. She is handled roughly. Her belongings are taken away from her. Her hands are cuffed before being loaded into an unmarked car. It is no exaggeration that her arrest looks like a kidnapping, one that you might expect to see in Moscow rather than in the streets of Boston. And of course, the terror of what she experienced is horrible to think about, but I also think about the thousands and thousands and thousands of other students here with a student visa or other lawful means who see this and think to themselves, this could happen to me. This could be something that happens to my roommate or my student or anybody. It seems like such a breakdown in the rule of law and the way that our country should operate. So I would like to ask my colleague, does this seem normal or appropriate for federal law enforcement officers of the United States to conduct routine arrests in plain clothes with unmarked cars and with this overwhelming show of force for individuals who pose no obvious physical threat to those law enforcement? And furthermore, is this not exactly the sort of operation that you would order if your goal is to intimidate and dissuade immigrant and activist communities from exercising their constitutional rights to free speech? Does punishing people for their political speech seem consistent with American democratic values? I can't believe that we would think that it would be consistent. And I wonder if my colleague from New Jersey would like to respond in any way to this.
I want to respond deeply. I first want to thank my colleague for being here in the morning. She's one of my colleagues I confided in when I told her sort of it was enough for me. I needed to do something different, and she readily encouraged me to be here on the floor for what is now about 13 hours. And she has encouraged me. She has encouraged my heart, and is just one of my dear friends, and I'm just so grateful to see her this morning. I want to say something before I begin answering her question. In my home county, the one I grew up in Bergen County, there's a family, the Alexanders, whose son, Idan, is an American who is being held by Hamas, and he is being likely tortured and in trauma and in pain. He's a U.S. citizen, he's an American. I had a friend give me this recently, a young man who was driving me around, this ribbon that I will often use to keep in my pocket and remind me of him and our determination to bring him home. To bring him home, I want his family to know that stays center in my thoughts. And I also feel, because of so many New Jerseyans who are affected by this crisis, who have lost family members in that region, that we must bring peace. And then my friend, Senator Smith, asked this question about, which is a real test, because when you disagree with someone's statements so much, but the very nature of the First Amendment, what makes this document so precious is that it says that no matter how reprehensible your speech is, this document says you have the right to say it. I remember the controversy over an NFL player who kneeled. And one of the voices that just sticks into my hand is a man who was a white guy from the military who just said, I fought battles, I think it was Afghanistan, and I am offended by his staking a knee. But the very reason I fought was so that he would have the freedom to do it. And so I came back. I was there on October 7th, and I have very hurt, strong feelings about what's going on over there, and urgent desires to end the nightmare, to bring people like Idan home, to end the nightmare for so many Israelis and Palestinians. And I find some of the things people are saying so unhelpful to the crisis and to the moral truths that I believe in. But I will fight for people's rights. And so here is a situation where you see video and it just doesn't seem like who we are. If you're revoking somebody's visa, make a phone call. Tell them that you have 30 days to leave, but there should be due process. And you should have to prove your claims in court. If this person is somehow lying with some kind of enemy, prove it. But what I saw there doesn't reflect the highest ideals. God, if this Constitution was easy, it wouldn't be worth the paper it's written on. And so I love my friend because she wades into some difficult waters, but she's guided by the oath that she took to defend the Constitution. And in these complex and difficult times, she's standing up. And I tell you, when we were in the immigration section last night, or earlier, I should say, we read the most painful stories. My brother over on the other side of me, I've got some of my really dear friends on the floor right now, Senator Murphy, Senator Warnock, Senator Smith. My brother, Senator Warnock, knows that we are a nation that is paying hundreds of millions of dollars over the years of the Trump administration to fund private prisons that are being paid, incentivized to take away people's liberties. We read stories in the immigration section about people that got trapped in those systems that should never be there. Horrible stories, painful voices I've read about folks who were caught up in a system. And I just loved that one article from that Canadian that was for weeks put in a private prison. And suddenly, when she heard the lies of the people who found ways to keep her there, the aha moment that she realized that these people, every day I'm there, they get profit. They're not incentivized by justice, they're incentivized by profit. I read stories, Senator Smith, of people that were sent to that horrible jail in El Salvador that the government admitted they made a mistake. They disappeared someone who has American family members. Story after story I read that just are such a betrayal, not of democratic values, but of American values. Because we all in this body know we need to do more to protect our borders, to keep us safe, to arrest criminals, be they undocumented or documented. That's an urgency we all feel. But when you sacrifice your core values and you sacrifice them to a demagogue who says, this is all about your safety, when you sacrifice your core principles for your safety, you will achieve neither. You will neither be safe nor morally strong. The true leaders on both sides of the aisle that I've heard over the years talk on these issues say, we can do both. We can make our country safe and we can abide by our values. And in a complex world where country after country disappears people, when authoritarian countries disappear their political enemies, their political adversaries, disappear people who say things they politically disagree with, those countries are looking to us. Did you know when Donald Trump started using that phrase, fake news, fake news, fake news, that in Turkey, Erdogan started arresting people on charges of fake news? Because we are looked to. I believe, like Reagan said, we could be that city on a hill, but we are up high and folks are going to look to us for what is the world order going to be? What is democracy globally going to look like? Are we going to defend democracy and democratic principles, or will we behave like the authoritarians that we should be against? So this is a fundamental question you ask, and it has been resonating all these 13 hours. We keep coming back to the Constitution because so many of the things the Trump administration are doing, from the separation of powers to violating the very first words of our Constitution, the very first words, this commitment we make when we swear our oaths, all of us, we the people of the United States of America, this is our mandate, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. It comes really quick. It comes really quick. Is it just to disappear a human being with no due process? I quoted Anton Scalia, this conservative that was sitting on a stage where somebody had a lot of affection for, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the moderator asked them, does somebody in our country have the rights of this document? And he said, yes, especially the 14th Amendment that doesn't say any citizen, it says no person, no body. And so where do we stand when our founders, those imperfect geniuses, say, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity. What nation are we turning over to the next president, to the next Congress, when this Congress is sacrificing the powers that are given right underneath that preamble? It's Article 1, which spells out All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of the Senate and the House of Representatives. And then it goes on to talk about what we have the power to do. We set the laws. This president is invoking emergency powers like the Alien Insurrection Act, a 1780 something law that the last time was used in World War II to detain Japanese Americans, something so shameful, to put them in concentration camps here in America. He wants to take power from our Congress. And the thing that is killing me, that is actually breaking my heart, Brother Warnock, the thing that's actually breaking my heart is that we're letting them. That we're letting him take our power. If Elon Musk was a Democrat and Joe Biden said, hey, go after the spending power of Congress, all the things that they approved. It's hard to do bipartisan things here. God bless Patty Murray and Susan Collins coming together and getting spending bills, hard worked, hard done. Lord knows, I sometimes play a little Motown in here, I ain't too proud to beg. I go to the appropriations leader and say, hey, my New Jerseyans in this county need this, and this county, we work on all this. I fight for programs with Lindsey Graham and USAID, with the now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, programs that he approved. The Department of Education, I've worked with Republicans to put things in Department of Education. There are people here that worked in a bipartisan way to try to simplify the FAFSA forms. I could go through all the work we've done that now this body, the Article 1 branch of Constitution, right under the mandate of the United States of America, as Tina Smith is telling us, right after we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, as the senator, my friend. And so that's why we're here. That's why now the Senate is filling up. It's friends galore. We got Amy Klobuchar now on the floor. That's why we're here. No business as usual. No business as usual. We're not doing the usual order. We're talking about these things. We're making the case. We talked about immigration. We talked about Medicaid. We talked about Medicare. We talked about health care. We talked about medical research. We talked about Social Security. We're marching through. 13 hours. I got more in the tank. And so I thank you for that question. It brings up very emotional things for me, I'll be honest. It brings up pain and frustration and hurt. It brings up me the pain of so many New Jerseyans that have reached out, the Palestinian doctors in my state who've worked with my office to get Palestinian babies into America for care. It brings up the hurt of being there and seeing the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. So many things are painful, but if we sacrifice our values, it reminds me of the mosque being built, 9/11. It reminds me of all these difficult points, the marchers in Skokie, of the KKK, all these difficult points where the values of this Constitution were tested, where we were being measured. But I have to say, what this president is doing with the Alien Insurrection Act, what this president is doing with no due process, what this president is doing with flushing the Department of Education, with getting rid of the USAID, with attacking thousands of people that serve our veterans, that serve our Social Security, those things should be obvious to this institution, to the Senate, that that's wrong. That they have unelected, the biggest campaign donor, unelected, who's getting our personal information, and there's no transparency. Nobody in this body can say they know what information, confidential information Elon Musk has, and knows what they do to it, because they never brought him here to answer for it. So I thank my colleague for the question, and I know Reverend Warnock is going to ask me one. I just want to take a couple pages into this for a second. The American people alone, our approach to foreign policy practiced by the president, what the president has done is left our allies feeling abandoned, feeling degraded and insulted. He's left our adversaries feeling emboldened. and has done things that has hurt our national security, that has made Americans less safe. In the short time President Trump has been in office for his second term, Americans have already been put in harm's way because of the reckless approach of the administration. It all begins, in fact, with his extremely poor judgment. This administration has prioritized the obsequiousness to Donald Trump over the expertise when it comes to some of the most important national security jobs, and it has sidelined dedicated professionals who've devoted their lives to keeping our country safe. This administration has also demonstrated an inability to distinguish between America's adversaries and America's allies, and a disturbing failure to understand how America's partnerships and investments abroad protect and benefit communities here. I'm reminded of General Mattis to say, if you're cutting things like the USAID or the State Department, buy me more bullets. But this is something that folks on the floor have talked about. I see one of my friends and somebody I really look up to. I see Tim Kaine, who sits a little bit higher up on the dais than me on the Foreign Relations Committee, somebody I've turned to many times. And he was astonished by this. And I know he, like me, has had private conversations with our Republican colleagues about this. But this body has not called for one hearing or one investigation, no accountability. What am I talking about? It's when last week we learned Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, Director of the CIA John Ratcliffe, Trump's National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Special Envoy for the Middle East Steve Witkoff, and several other high-ranking officials in the Trump administration discussed attack plans against the Houthis in Yemen in a group chat over the commercial messaging app Signal. We learned of this because the president's National Security Advisor mistakenly invited the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg, on the text chain. And after Jeffrey Goldberg published a story describing this jaw-dropping national security failure where they could have broken at least 2 laws that I'm aware of, just by doing that, from the preservation of public records all the way to disclosing national security, highly classified information. The president and his cabinet members didn't step up and say we made mistakes, didn't step up and say this is clearly, abjectly wrong, didn't step up and say there will be accountability, didn't step up and say we'll take actions. No, what they decided to do when they were exposed is actually target the reporter with a barrage of insults and not acknowledging any wrongdoing. Unsurprisingly, the Trump team's response led Jeffrey Goldberg to publish the rest of the Signal chat messages, which exposed more administration lies. We're going to go into that, but I really want to turn to my brother. And I said earlier about Senator Murphy's speech, one of my favorite I've ever heard when I was in the Senate. Brother Warnock gave a speech that was one of my favorite in the Senate too, when he talked about the difference between January 5th America and then that fateful day, January 6th. He has been a friend of mine for a long time, and I think he might be the only person in this body. I started this talk 13 hours ago by talking about getting into good trouble. I think you might be the only person in this body that was arrested in this building for protesting before you came to serve in this building as a United States Senator. I'm going to stick to what I'm told to say. If you ask me that you'd like to speak, you have to say that I'd like to ask you a question. I think that's how this goes.
Will the senator from New Jersey yield for a question?
Why, yes, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, good morning, and let me just say, Cory Booker, how very, very proud I am of you. It's a real honor to serve in this body. I know that all of my colleagues who are here agree that it's an honor for the people of your state to say that when we take stock of all the issues that we wrestle with as we look into the eyes of our children and consider what we want for them and in the eyes of our aging parents as they deal with the blessings and the burdens of getting older. That since all of us can't go to Washington, we're going to send you. And we're going to trust that in rooms of power, where decisions are being made, that you're going to center the people and not yourself. You're going to be thinking about ordinary people. And so, Cory Booker, I want to thank you for holding vigil. As I prepare to ask you a question, I just want to thank you for holding vigil for this country all night. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said that when he marched without the king, he felt like his legs were praying. And so in a very real sense, your legs have been praying as you've been standing on this floor all night. And thank you for praying not just with your lips, but with your legs for a nation in need of healing. I just got off a prayer call that I do every Tuesday morning at 7:14 a.m. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, if they would seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins and heal the land. The nation needs healing. And we need spiritual healing, we need moral healing, but literally there are people all across our country who need healing, who need health care. And so that's why I was so proud to come to this Senate after being arrested in the Rotunda a few years before that. Proud to join you in the Senate. Proud that we were able to pass, just a couple months after I got here, the American Rescue Plan, which did so much incredible work. In that American Rescue Plan, there was the expanded child tax credit, which literally cut child poverty more than 40% in our country. I wish we could get it extended. But one of the other things we did was we lowered Georgians and Americans' health care premiums by hundreds of dollars on average. We passed a tax cut, and that's so relevant in this moment because that's what this body is prepared to do right now, I guess, in the next few days. Pass a tax cut, but that tax cut is literally going to be for the richest of the rich, the wealthiest among us. But we passed a tax cut that brought health care into reach for tens of thousands of Georgians and millions of Americans in the American Rescue Plan. These tax credits are so critical that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said that the number of Americans without health care would grow by 3.8 million people in just 1 year if the premium subsidies were allowed to expire. Forgive me for my phone ringing. My 8-year-old and 6-year-old are calling me. They're not impressed with what I'm doing.
That's an important call.
They're not impressed. But we know that this would impact thousands of Georgians who've only recently been able to receive health care. So we passed in that American Rescue Plan these tax credits which put health care in reach. And now they're set to expire if we don't do our work. And that's why what you're doing, Cory Booker, is holy work. It's within a political context, but this is holy work. If these tax credits are allowed to expire, a 45-year-old in Georgia with $62,000 annual income would see premiums go up by $1,414 a year. A 60-year-old couple in Georgia with an $82,000 annual income would see premiums go up by a staggering $18,157 a year. Think about that. Nearly 1/3 of Americans have less than $500 in savings in their bank account. Imagine the health care costs for a 60-year-old couple going up by more than $18,000. A health insurance premium hike like this would be more than an inconvenience. It wouldn't just be a nuisance. It's literally the difference between having health care coverage and not having health care coverage. And so I'm thinking about people like that. And I'm thinking about my constituent, Cassie Cox from Bainbridge, Georgia. She wasn't able to afford health care on the Affordable Care Act marketplace until the premium tax credit brought health care into reach. And shortly after she became insured, she severely cut her hand, which landed her in the emergency room with 35 stitches. And with insurance, it still cost her about $300. Had it not been for the tax credits that allowed her to get health care, she could have been in financial ruin. She's one of the hundreds of thousands of Georgians at risk of losing their coverage if these tax credits are allowed to expire, if we don't do our work. If we're more focused on the wealthiest of the wealthy rather than the concerns of ordinary people. Senator Booker, should Democrats and Republicans come together to extend the premium tax credit for hardworking folk in New Jersey and in Georgia? What do you think?
My easiest colleague question I've gotten over these 13 hours, yes, they should. I was talking in the healthcare section about, while there's these big issues that we should be concerned about, $880 billion from Medicaid, cutting all of that out to give the wealthiest, as you said, God bless them, they don't need our help. They don't need more tax cuts, to give them tax cuts and explode the deficit. This is literally taking from working Americans. The letters we read, the voices of Americans, the fear, the anguish, the hurt, the worry, people who were suffering from Parkinson's, who had children with disabilities, who had elder parents living with them. So many people telling them, not $880 billion they were saying, that their whole financial well-being was hanging on a thread and just cutting the transportation programs involved. But I said, while all that was going on, the Trump administration was still doing other things to attack ACA enrollment, to attack the tax credits that people are relying on, doing other things to drive up costs. I know some of my colleagues are on the floor, like Amy Klobuchar. We've centered the lowering of prescription drug costs, and he is doing things to drive out-of-pocket costs up. There's a cruelty in that. And I tend to still be standing at noon when we have to pause in the Senate for the pledge and the prayer. And Pastor, I want to talk to you in the way that you talked to me last night. I called my brother, called my friend, and told him I was doing this. And Warnock shifts gears a lot in my life. Sometimes he's my colleague, sometimes he's my brother. Sometimes we talk about the state of two unmarried guys in the Senate. I don't mean to put you on blast, sir. But the bald-headed caucus. But the one time you shift those gears into being my pastor and my friend, we prayed together last night. And most Americans identify in our faith, Christian faith. And you and I know, I would yield for you to ask a question, but I'm yielding just to have you talk about Matthew 25.
Right. I'm a Matthew 25 Christian.
You and I both, that's what we hold in common.
And it's a long chapter, but the section we're talking about,
yes,
in Matthew 25, Jesus says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was sick.
What were you?
I was in prison and you came to visit me, and someone asked, Lord, when were you sick? When were you in prison? When were you an undocumented immigrant?
Yes, yes.
And the answer comes, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it also unto me. Another part of that text says, and when you don't do it for the least of these, you don't do it for me. The scripture says that the one who gives to the poor lendeth to the Lord. This is holy work.
Sir, my friend, I don't understand how a nation could allow a president to be so cruel that he would take away health care from people struggling with children that are facing the worst of health challenges, people who have a spouse, like the person who wrote me. No, it wasn't the spouse. She wrote me herself. She had Parkinson's. I got upset because that's how my father died, and I watched for year after year after year how it affected my family, how it demanded from my mother, how it cost thousands of dollars for his care. And thank God we had the privilege, but this person was writing because they were afraid and they didn't, of what the costs would be. How can our country say that kind of cruelty? How can a nation with a majority of its people are people of faith, be they Muslims or Jain or Baha'i or Hindu or Jewish, how can the central precept of our country, founded on principles that are reflected in the good book, how could we say that we should cut health care from the sick and the needy to give bigger tax cuts to Elon Musk?
Well, the senator from New Jersey.
I will yield to you, my brother, while retaining the floor.
You know, this is the reason why every Sunday and every weekend when I leave here, I return not only to Georgia, but I return to my pulpit. And some folk ask, well, why do you continue to lead Ebenezer Church? I return to my pulpit every Sunday because, notwithstanding wonderful people like you, I don't want to spend all my time talking to politicians. I'm afraid I might accidentally become one. And so I want to connect and check in with ordinary folks because I was focused on this health care issue long before I came to the Congress. Dr. King said that of all the injustices, inequality in health care, he said, is the most shocking and the most inhumane.
I read that last night, Pastor. I read that last night.
The most shocking and the most inhumane. And it's the reason why, as a pastor, inspired by Dr. King, leading the congregation that Dr. King led, way back in 2014, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, were you here? You came after.
I came after.
You came right after that. I got arrested in the governor's office in Georgia fighting for health care.
I didn't know you were a two-time arrestee, man.
I got a long record, brother. But all for good trouble. Good
All
trouble.
for good trouble.
Good trouble.
Good trouble.
And we had a 1960 sit-in in the governor's office. Waves of us got arrested. They arrested one wave, and then another wave came, and another wave came. And we were trying to get Georgia to expand Medicaid.
Yes, I remember that.
We had passed the Affordable Care Act here, but Georgia was digging in its heels and saying, no, we're not going to expand Medicaid. And so when I got here, Senator Klobuchar, I made it a priority of mine to get incentives for Georgia to expand Medicaid. And you remember, I went to our caucus.
Yes.
And I said, look, Georgia and about 9, then 10 other states have not expanded. They should have done it a long time ago. Let's see if we can make it even easier for them. And as a freshman senator, I was able to convince our caucus to give $14.5 billion for non-expansion states, which includes $2 billion just for Georgia to incentivize Medicaid expansion. Why? So that working people in the gap, people who literally go to work every day, can get health care. Georgia has left that $2 billion sitting on the table and almost 600,000 Georgians in the gap. The governor's plan has literally enrolled a whopping 6,500 people in health care. But we've got nearly 600,000 people in the gap. And this is not theoretical stuff. Every time I talk about this, I have to talk about Heather Payne. Because Heather Payne is a resident of Dalton, Georgia. She spent her career taking care of others. She's a traveling nurse. Heather worked throughout COVID as an ER and labor and delivery nurse yet often she did not have health care coverage herself because she fell into the health care coverage gap. Sometimes she had health insurance coverage, sometimes she didn't. She made too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but the only coverage options available to her were unaffordable, costing anywhere between $500 and $1,000 a month. And so about 2.5 years ago, Heather Payne, a traveling nurse, noticed that something was wrong in her body. And even though she noticed that something was wrong, Senator Klobuchar, she literally had to wait for months before she could see a doctor to save up the money. And then she finally went and saw a neurologist who said, you know what, you've actually had a series of small strokes. And even after getting that diagnosis, she had to put off serious medical procedures because she cannot work as an ER nurse anymore and is still waiting to get approved for disability so she can get Medicaid coverage. And so this nurse who has spent her whole life healing other people can't get health care. I think it's wrong that in the richest country on earth, we don't want to lower the cost of health care for people who are working hard in our communities every day, literally keeping us healthy. I'm going to ask you another softball question, Senator Booker. Should people like my friend Heather Payne have access to affordable health care?
Yes.
In the first few months of the Trump administration, it's been clear that this administration is not working for ordinary people.
Just to try to stay in the parliamentary loan, I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I yield for another question while retaining the floor.
The administration is working for billionaires. They're working for people like Elon Musk. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is basic. And while we're speaking about health, we've got to cheer on our federal workers who are keeping us healthy. And there are folks in this administration who say that they want to make them the villains. That's what Russell Vought said, that when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not go to work. Our federal workers, because they are increasingly viewed, he said, as villains. I got news for Russell Vought. The people who staff our VA hospitals are not villains. The people who keep our food safe and our water clean are not villains. The people who keep our military bases operating are not villains. And so we stand with them in this moment because they are indeed keeping all of us healthy. And so in closing, and nobody believes a Baptist preacher when he says in closing, let me say that again, you're doing holy work here, brother, by holding this floor. You are literally holding vigil for our nation. We are beset by the politics of fear. The scripture tells us that perfect love casts out all fear. We are witnessing again this ugly game, the politics of us and them. And there are a lot of folk who, because so much of what has been going on in our nation across Republican and Democratic administrations, let's be honest, has not been working for ordinary people. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots has gotten larger and larger. And when people are vulnerable, sometimes they give in to the politics of fear, somebody telling them that they've got all the answers. And so we saw this in this last cycle. We're seeing it in this moment in our country, the politics of us and them. And sadly, hardworking, working-class people are waking up this morning and they're discovering that they thought they were in the us. And they're discovering that they're in the them, that the them is larger than they thought. And so we've got to hold vigil for each other, for workers, for women, for immigrants, for immigrant families, for our sisters and our brothers, red, yellow, brown, black, and white, for the aging who need Social Security, for the working poor who need Medicaid, for those who are seeking asylum and they just need a dignified path, for those who've been working here for years and they need a dignified path to citizenship. We've got a whole vigil for each other. And so thank you for this work. This is not the end, but the beginning. The struggle continues. Dr. King said that the true measure of a person is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in moments of challenge and controversy. So thank you for praying for this nation with your lips and with your legs. And I'm going to ask you one last question. Do you intend to keep praying?
Amen. Hallelujah. Yes, I do. Thank you for that question. I know there's going to be a question coming to me. I just want to say, pray Isaiah 40:31 for me. I think you know what that is.
Got it. I'm going to ordain this man.
All right. The article I was going to start reading.
Senator Booker.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor. If the senator has a question, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
So you'll yield for a question?
Yes, while retaining the floor, yes.
Very good. I want to, first of all, thank you. Thank you for waking us up this morning, literally. All night, as Reverend Warnock would tell you, I know you were in here doing your work, but it was raining, there was thunder, it was really bad. And then when we woke up this morning, you were still talking. You were still talking and the sun was out and you're giving people hope. When I think about what you're doing, you're like an alarm clock right now for this country. And slowly but surely, we've seen people realize this isn't just a bunch of campaign rhetoric that's going on. This is actually happening. And people are stepping up. They're fighting it in the courts. They're fighting it in Congress with what you're doing today, with what, as you know, last week when we got the horrible news that the Defense Secretary of the United States was using an unauthorized line to just talk with his friends like he was spiking a football about putting the lives of our service members at risk. People stood up. Democrats stood up. They asked the tough questions. And one of the things that bothers me is that it is so hard to see your way out of it. A lot of people feel like we're just wallowing right now. But what you're telling us today is there is another way. Because if we just wallow, these guys are going to continue to cut kids' cancer treatment. If we just wallow, they're going to cut Medicaid when 1 out of 2 seniors in my state who are in assisted living are on Medicaid. Or they're going to continue to mess around with these tariffs, which really are national sales tax, something like $2,500 for every single family. They are going to continue to be callous. I had someone say to me last night, do they care? Do they care when those U.S. aid workers who devoted their lives to feeding the hungry around the world, when they have to stand outside their building and watch them literally take the name of their life's work off the brick on that building? Do they care? And one of the things that we have done, the Democrats have done, have stood up. And what is coming upon us in these next few weeks is this tax bill that basically will give billionaires tax cuts on the backs of regular people, ransacking the government, firing veterans, messing around with Social Security. I had a guy tell me that he spent 3 days after his wife died in Minnesota, Reverend, 3 days just trying to figure out how he gets the death benefit. Why did this check show up at his door? He's trying to do the right thing. He calls, he gets put on hold. He sends an email, no one writes him back. He drives into Brainerd, Minnesota, 30-mile drive, He's like 80 years old. He drives in there, and then they finally help him. Then he gets back, then something else goes wrong. Then he tries to call again. He finally ends up at our door, at our office, and we figure it out for him. There's 70-some million people that's going to happen to. These guys don't get their act together. So it's a real good question, do they care? But when we have this tax bill coming up in front of us in these next few weeks, I think people got to understand what's going on. They have to understand that even in the House budget that came out that'll be the subject of this, it's over $2 trillion tax cuts for people making over $400,000 a year, like Elon Musk, that don't need it. And so there's actually a way to stop it that's in the hands of the Republicans right now. If just 2 or 3 of them stood up on the House floor and did what you did, Senator Booker, who they said no, and if 4 of them in the United States Senate, 4 of them stood up, 4 senators stood up, then we could have the discussion about, okay, let's make government work better, we're all in, but let's not do it on the backs of regular people. Let's not do it on the backs of kids that are in cancer research or veterans who are trying to simply get their well-earned benefits because they put their lives on the line in the battlefield. Or let's not do it on the backs of farmers in Minnesota and Georgia who are simply have these small farms and they're trying to get by, and then suddenly, wham, Donald Trump decides, shock and awe, let's do a tariff and let's get mad at all our allies across the country like Canada. Oh, that's a good idea. Those are the things that they're doing. So my question of you is, how many people need to stand up in the U.S. Senate to make this happen? Because I know Democrats are united. I know we're all standing up. But tell me how many people can stand up on the other side. If they stood up and joined you, what a difference it would make.
So I want to thank the senator for the question. And when I think of people who stand in adversity, I still see you standing in a snowstorm and the strength that you've had as you stood up to fight for affordable health care, stood up and fought for affordable prescription drugs, stood up and fought for farmers and for police officers and for communities. You are that kind of person that gives me strength, that I've learned so much from. And you have brought this issue up. What you just said on the floor to let you know this is not performative for her. She has brought this up in our small meetings with Chuck Schumer. She has brought this up in our caucus meetings. I've seen her talk about it in her own state. This question of what will it take? And here's something that pains me to hear. That Elon Musk is calling Republicans up and saying, if you take this stand, I'm going to put $100 million in a primary against you. That they are bullying people who dare to stand up and say, maybe this appointee is not the most qualified person you could find to lead this cabinet position, or maybe it's wrong to cut this agency that we together created in Congress. There are people who are asking those questions, but we have seen them get dragged through X, mob attacked when it comes to their virtual presence, and threatened to be primaried. But we know, because you're somebody that works on both sides of the aisle, that there are really good people of conscience on both sides of the aisle. And as the great pastor said, there are enough sins in this body to go around for all of us. But this is not a partisan moment. It is a moral moment. This is not a left or right moment. It is a right or wrong moment. We have a president that is shredding the very agencies that Americans who are struggling are relying on, working people that over the last 71 days are finding higher prices, that are finding housing prices going up. Farmers in my state too, it's our 4th largest industry. I've had farmers who'll come to me as far away as Texas and tell me that they're clawing back these contracts that we've already relied on to buy things already, and now you're putting me in a situation where I might lose my farm. You see veterans who come to our offices. I know they come to your office, Senator Klobuchar. You're a senator from Minnesota, but you are a national figure, so I know they're coming to your office. And they're saying things to me like, I'm a veteran. I could go do other jobs. I wanted to work on suicide prevention and mental health issues, and I'm being fired? And you said it right. I've heard you say it in private. I've heard you say it in public. I know it irks you Because you're one of these sort of balanced people. Okay, we have a big deficit that is a real problem. Maybe they're trying to lower the deficit. But they're not. That's the irony. They're not. They're about to explode trillions of dollars, most of which disproportionately will go to the wealthiest people, as you've been pointing out in our private phone calls over and over again, Senator Klobuchar. And so your question to me is spot on. It's spot on. And it's why I am standing here right now at the top of another hour, because of what you are saying relentlessly, persistently, and unyieldingly. Why are we hurting Americans from our farmers? We just talked about rural hospitals here for about 20, 30 minutes and what the threats are to them. We talked about rural social security centers and the threats that are to them. We talked about communities all over our country who are being hurt. And your question, why? To give tax breaks that will disproportionately go to the wealthiest Americans who, you and I are not those people that demonize wealth. We don't demonize success. I want more people to start businesses. I want more people to dream of moving on up like the Jeffersons. I want more people to have that vision. I am not one of those people that are going to be mad at you because you're very successful. I'm going to be one of those people that says, you don't need more tax cuts. And we as a society have an obligation to each other, to those farmers, to those rural folks, to the cops I stood with at the funeral of one of their colleagues in Newark 2 weeks ago. We have an obligation to them to help them get equipment, to protect themselves. This country cannot do something that is so monumentally fiscally irresponsible. Who was the one person in the House that voted, a Republican that voted against it, a guy named Massey? And I watched it. I had to smile and laugh because he said the quiet part out loud. He's sitting there looking at something. I saw him in an interview, and he says, by their own numbers, this doesn't add up. They're adding to our deficit by the trillions. He stayed true to his principles. What happened to all those mighty deficit hawks in the House of Representatives on the Republican side that caved to the pressure of a president? I'm so happy you asked it in the right fashion, as I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Very good. That was perfect. So I think one of the things you talked about was just this deficit and what's happening and what we're seeing with their proposal right now that's going to come right before us. By some estimates, it's going to add $37 trillion, $37 trillion in 30 years as we go ahead. I mean, I literally cannot believe that, when in fact we could step back now and we could say, what things can we do? What things can we do on the tax code? Because there's a whole lot of things we can do to strengthen Social Security, strengthen what we have in our government. And what really, when you step back and look at the economy, and I heard this the other day on a business channel, just about a month or two ago, man, we were coming out strong. We are a country that came out of the pandemic in a stronger way than so many other countries did around the world. We're ready. Inflation was at least steady, and it was starting to come down here. And now all of a sudden, we see chaos is up, corruption is up, and yes, costs are up. Ask anyone at the grocery store. And one of the problems when you look at what we could be doing to address the debt is that the proposals out there are just going to make it worse. That means more interest payments. That means more interest payments on the backs of regular people, and that means less we can do to help them as we look at what's happening right now. And one of the things you raised, Senator Booker, which I appreciate how much you know about this, is just this prescription drug negotiation and Medicare. So what do we finally do? So decades before you or Senator Murphy or Senator Warnock got here, before I got to this place, they made a sweetheart deal with the pharmaceutical companies, and they actually baked in so that they didn't have to negotiate prices for 73 million people. And anything. They could just charge whatever they wanted for these prescription drugs. What happens? Well, guess what happens? Suddenly, the drugs for our seniors are 2 to 1 what they are in places like Canada, our neighbor, our friend. 2 to 1 what they are over there. You got people driving up to Canada from Minnesota because we can see Canada from our porch. And they are like going up there trying to get less expensive drugs. And then they figured, what's going on? So a whole bunch of people started to say, let's look at this. It took years to get this done. Finally, we passed a bill it said they've got to negotiate. And we took the first 10 drugs. And the last administration got to pick those drugs, and they picked blockbuster drugs. Drugs like Eliquis, drugs like Xarelto, drugs like Januvia, Jardiance. I memorize them because I can always find people that take them. I don't make them raise their hand, say they take them. But these are blockbuster drugs. And they reduced the price by like 70% for our seniors. That's going to kick in soon, but not if this administration messes it up. And we have seen from everything from, giving signal lines about secret battle plans to reporters to deciding they're going to shut down the people that worked on protecting our nuclear facilities, and oops, we made a mistake. Or how about when they said, okay, we want to do something about avian flu, but we're going to fire all the people that work at, no, we're going to fire them back. We're going to hire them back. That's what's been going on right now. So when I look at this really complicated prescription drug negotiation where you're taking on some of the biggest companies in the world, I say to myself, okay, so our Secretary of Health, Kennedy, he won't even agree, and when he's asked under oath if he's going to keep this up. They fired a bunch of people that would work on it. They haven't shown they're going to keep this negotiation going. Meanwhile, we've got put in place a $2,000 cap for our seniors out of pocket on drug costs under Medicare. That's really good. We put in place that insulin limit on $35 a month, and we thank Reverend Warnock, and we thank you, Senator Booker, Senator Murphy, everyone that worked on that. We got that in place. So now we got the big thing, which is the negotiation of all these drugs, because 15 more drugs are coming their way for negotiation. Again, blockbuster drugs, Ozempic, blockbuster drugs. Those drugs are coming their way for negotiation, but they have not committed to do that. They have not committed to do that. And even if they did commit to do it, do they even have the people to negotiate to take on these major companies? So my question of you, Senator Booker, after being up all night, after getting us through the storm of last night and into the bright sunshine of today, after holding the floor all this time, I can't even imagine how much your feet must hurt, but those feet hurting is nothing compared, which is why you're doing it, to how the rest of the people in this country right now feel and how they're hurting. My question is, how can they move forward without trying to save money for the people of this country? Because what I see happening, and there's so many signs, you see it every single day, when they are getting rid of some of these people that work on it, then you're not going to be able to get the Social Security for my friend that I met from Cross Lake, Minnesota. Then you're not going to be able to get that stuff done. But I think as we look at those cuts, it's not just the word cuts. What effect does it have on real people when they can't get their services? When our veterans, who also have complex ways that they've got to deal with the government, when they have no one answering the phone, when they've gotten rid of veterans who've actually done the work. So my question here is, for people to translate this into the real world, is what is all this going to mean for people in the real world, what they're doing right now?
I love, thank you for the question, Senator Klobuchar. I love that you're bringing back to real people and what effect it's having. And what you're spelling out is something that's really important. There's a strategy that they have expressly said. They want to overwhelm you, not us. They want to overwhelm the American people. They want to flood the zone. And so I see a whole bunch of doing things to distract us. Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, Greenland, all these things to try to whip us up and not pay attention to what most Americans are concerned with, is can they make ends meet? Even the big reconciliation bill that they're going to try to do, that we have to find a way to appeal to a small group of Republican congresspeople to stop, of cutting $880 million out of Medicaid. We went through in great detail at length last night why that's bad, but you are pointing to something even more insidious. As that big thing is going on, they actually are cutting the support to get more people signed up with the ACA. Already happened. Make it harder to sign up for the ACA. They've already cut the tax credits that are helping people that are in the ACA get resources to help with their health care costs. They're going after these things. Here's one that you know really well. They're going after, as we talk about all of these parents struggling with children and family members with chronic diseases, we know one of the things that help people with chronic diseases is having access to fresh, healthy foods, but they're cutting access to that for our kids going to school. This administration has not only overseen in 71 days a rise in inflation, a rise in the cost of groceries, a lowering of people's 401ks with the stock market going down. It's not only bringing economic chaos, but they are already hurting people on their basic delivery of their services, from taking thousands of jobs out of Social Security, making it harder for people who have some problem to get it solved, to the VA, to the ACA. I will definitely yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I was thinking as you talked about the Affordable Care Act and all the work that went into it and what came out of it, I was remembering the constant attempts to repeal that bill. I was remembering when Senator John McCain, I think you were here for this, came in and kind of did the unexpected, right? He went in here, he bucked his party, and he said no. He didn't agree with Donald Trump about this. He didn't agree with his leaders on this. He did what he thought was right. And my issue is that we all have those moments where we have to make decisions about what we think is right. And I think about Donald Trump, and that's just this week, he said he wanted to violate the Constitution, which he says practically every single hour, but he said that he would try to serve another term, that he would do this, he would do that. He is literally treating this presidency like he's the king, and I guess Elon Musk is thus the court jester at his side, or the White House IT guy. But the point is that he's treating this like a king, and you serve on the Judiciary Committee. You know, you are a student of history. You're also a scholar in terms of understanding this government and how it works. And I think one of the things that's most unsettling for people that they just don't understand is how you could have a president in place that doesn't respect that democracy. I remember when we all gathered for the inauguration, and I had 4 minutes because of my job with the Rules Committee to address those gathered in that rotunda. And I noted that our democracy can be a hot mess right now, but it's still the best form of government that we've got, that our democracy is truly our shelter in the storm. It's our shelter in the storm, to quote a great songwriter from the state of Minnesota. That the reason that we don't have, I know you may have a few songwriters from there, if the Senator could yield for one question, who is your best songwriter and singer from the state of New Jersey, just to make clear who is.
Oh, is that your
will
question?
Will you yield for a question from me?
I will.
Yes.
I will answer that question by avoiding it, because in New Jersey there are so many great patron saints, from the great Bon Jovi to the great Bruce Springsteen to the incredible Queen Latifah, the chairman of the board from New Jersey, the great Frank Sinatra. So I'm not going to pick. We have so many great singers, rappers like Redman. We are just a thriving state of Count Basie. There's just too many. I would not force you to do that. Of course, it's Prince, I think, from your state. Prince.
Bob Dylan. But that aside, I am very impressed, Senator Booker, that after 12 hours now, 13 hours, that you still are able to make sure that you mention every songwriter. But that aside, Bob Dylan once had that great line, "Shelter in the storm." Our democracy is shelter in the storm. And then I noted that day that in some countries, presidential inaugurations, they're held in gilded palaces, not in the United States of America. In the United States of America, it's held in the People's House. That's what you're doing right now, Senator Booker, because the People's House is where the action should be. That's Article 1. And the Constitution specifically says here, we have equal branches of government. And the final thing is that the power in that rotunda that day, and this is where we get into Donald Trump thinking he's king, the power of that rotunda didn't come from the people in there, it came from outside, came from the people. So that's why you see the people standing up right now, our constituents, going to these town halls, standing up, breaking the phone lines in the U.S. Senate, sending in the emails with their stories that we are able, that you've heard the senators and you have read on the Senate floor about things that have happened to your constituents. So that's the power from the outside. So the question that I ask of you is just tell me what you think people can do when you've got a president in there that, he thinks he is king and he thinks that a democracy is just something that he can just shove aside and say whatever he wants and break whatever rule that people depend on, that they depend on to be able to vote, to be able to participate and have their case made. Tell me what you think. What's the answer to that?
Thank you, Senator. I'll answer that, and I see Ron Wyden has come to the floor, who's, for both Amy and I, one of the chair people or at this point, ranking members of one of the great committees. To Amy Klobuchar's question, I read a lot of angry letters. People who were demanding of me to do something to stop them, do something different. Stand up, speak up, Senator. I'm afraid. Stand up, speak up, Senator. I'm so angry. Stand up, speak up, Senator. The services for my disabled child are threatened. Stand up, speak up. So it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, why my staff and I talked about this for so many days, to do something to let our constituents know, to elevate their voices on the floor, to read their letters, to read their statements, not just New Jerseyans, but like you, the hundreds and hundreds of people that are calling us from other states. But I am most moved by the letters who tell me about their pain or their challenges or their fears, but they end that question with your question. But I am here to help. Tell me how I can help. I am here to help. Tell me I can help. And you said it, Senator. I read the letter of John McCain last night. His letter explaining his vote. It was so beautiful. It was tough like he was. It was hard on the whole body. But he called to principles. Senator Schumer was here when I read it. It was eerie because he was describing what went wrong then, which is the same thing here, that we do need to make our country better. We do need to have a bolder vision for healthcare, a bolder vision for Social Security. We need to make them work for the people, but we're not doing it here in this body. And this man who's not acting like a president, but is trashing our constitutional traditions, is violating our laws as he's getting tied up in court, but ignoring court orders. And when he gets a decision he doesn't like, he trashes the judges so badly that the Supreme Court itself finds that it has to go out and tell him to stop it. What stopped health care from being taken away in the last time wasn't the persuasive powers of anybody in this side of the political aisle in the Senate convincing anybody over there. I would like to think it was my eloquence with Lisa Murkowski. I would like to think it was my high-minded intellect that somehow it was damaged playing too much football, but that somehow I got a right argument to Susan Collins. That wasn't it. I'd like to think it was my ability to stand up to John McCain himself. No, none of that. It was the people. It was the people. You remember the little lobbyists in their wheelchairs rolling up to senators and speaking their heart, telling them of their pain and their fear. It was people coming here and marching, people coming and flooding the calls like they did, like they're doing now. People writing letters, people marching, people in their states from all political spectrums coming in and saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And so if you're asking me what we can do, I know what we can do, but we've got to, as the great song. Senator Klobuchar, I had my staff print a bunch of things I sent them. I sent them because I knew they were some of my favorite people from history. There's one here, Webster. There's one by Jefferson. There's the letters from the Birmingham jail, Langston Hughes, something by Harper Lee, Emma Lazarus. But here's one. Here's the answer. In a poem, and forgive me for reading this. I wanted to do it at some point today, and this is perfect. And I see my senator here. He may have a question, but I love this poem. It was written and put to song by a man named James Weldon Johnson. He was an educator, a poet, a diplomat, a civil rights activist. He was born in the great state of Florida. And he said that this is what we have to do. Lift every voice and sing. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound like the rolling sea. We must sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us, sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us, facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on, let us march on, let us march on until victory is won. It doesn't ignore the wretchedness of our history. It speaks to the truth and the excitement and the hope about that past and the virtues that our ancestors gave us. He goes on, stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over or away with the tears which tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last where the white gleam of the bright stars is cast. The last stanza. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the night, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God and true to this native land. What can we do? Is do like our ancestors did. What can we do? Do like the people who never gave up, who, even when this country that they loved didn't love them back, they kept fighting and kept pushing. And we know that, Senator Klobuchar, because we've witnessed that. In my time in the Senate with you, we've seen the most amazing, shocking moments within a Bergefeld case at the Supreme Court, recognizing the humanity, the dignity, and the equal rights of LGBTQ Americans to have love and marry. We've seen fights in this time that we've been here, where we've seen victories on health care that made such a difference in people's lives. We've seen the fights while we've been here, some of the most painful moments where we've seen the arc of the moral universe bent, not by the people here, not by the people in this body. You think we got suffrage because a bunch of men on the Senate floor said, okay, guys, come on, put your hands in here. Ready, give women the right to vote on 3. Ready, break. That's not how it happened. It's not how it happened. It happened because the power of the people is greater than the people in power. You think we got civil rights because one day Strom Thurmond, after filibustering for 24 hours, you think we got civil rights because he came to the floor one day and said, I've seen the light. Let those Negro people have the right to vote. No, we got civil rights because people marched for it, sweat for it, and John Lewis bled for it. And so I'm scared too. But fear is a necessary precondition to courage. I am angry too. But my mom told me, never let your anger consume you. Channel it, fuel it, so it can help your love be greater and stronger. Amy Klobuchar, that's what this moment needs. And our job in this body is to be truth tellers. Our job, just as you said so brilliantly, is to elevate the voices of the people of the country, because you're right, Amy Klobuchar, this is the people's house. It's Article 1 of the Constitution, and it's under assault. Article 1 is under assault. Our spending powers, our budgetary powers, the power to establish agencies like the Department of Education and USAID, it's under assault by a president that doesn't respect this document. And how do we stop them? I'm sorry to say we hold powerful positions, we are elected by great states, but we're in the minority right now, and you spelled it out at the beginning of your questions to me. It will take 3 people of conscience on that side. It will take 4 here. I'm going back to my book because there's somebody that you know. I don't know if my staff put it in at the last moment. Yes, they did. Margaret Chase Stevens, who you know. Margaret Chase Smith, excuse me. A U.S. Senator from Maine, a Republican. When a demagogue had rose in the land exploiting people's fear, deporting Jews who were not citizens of this country because they were accusing them of being communists, at a time that this body was being twisted and contorted to the will of a demagogue, where nobody had the courage to stand up. It was a woman from the Republican Party that stood, I don't know, somewhere in this body. Her feet might have been tired. Her heart might have been hurt. She might have been afraid of the consequences to stand up to people preaching the Red Scare. But this woman in this body, rare thing in those years, this woman in this body who are founders, those imperfect geniuses that wrote this Constitution, the woman in this body who wasn't imagined by our founders, thank God they called upon us to make a more perfect union. And generations of activists finally made it real that women could serve in this body. She had the courage, the audacity to call her own party to task. I read her words. She said, "I don't believe that the Republican Party is any sense a party of fear, but I do believe that the Republican Party has made an alliance with the four horsemen of fear. The fear of communists, the fear of labor unions, the fear of the future, the fear of progress. I think it's high time that we remembered that we have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution," she continues. "I think it's time that we remembered that the Constitution, as amended, speaks not only of the freedom of speech, but also the freedom of trial by jury." This great senator, this great Republican said, whether it is criminal prosecutions in a court or character prosecution in the Senate, there is little political distinction when the life of a person has been ruined. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism in making character assassinations all too frequently, those who, by our own words and acts, ignore some of the basic principles of what it means to be an American. The right to criticize without thinking the president is going to drag you from the Oval Office for criticizing him. The right to hold unpopular beliefs. That if you have beliefs that I find contemptible, it doesn't mean that I can disappear you from a city street. She goes on, the right to protest, that just for assembling and speaking up, that's not a right to cut hundreds of millions of dollars to that university's science funding. The right to independent thought. The exercise of these rights should not cost one single American citizen his reputation or his right to a livelihood, nor should he be in danger of losing his reputation or livelihood merely because he happens to know someone who holds unpopular beliefs, like a law firm that represents suing the president and now has their very firm, their very livelihoods, the legal secretaries and others, come after them. Margaret Chase Smith goes on to call her party to be a woman of conscience, to stand up and say, I quote, "The American people are sick and tired of being afraid to speak their minds, lest they be politically smeared as communists or fascists by their opponents. Freedom of speech," she says, "is not what it used to be in America. It has been so abused by some that it is not exercised by others. So, dear God, if I stand up in this body and say it is wrong to put Pete Hegseth in the cabinet as Secretary of Defense because he's unqualified, look at a Signal chat to see how unqualified he is." Margaret Chase Smith continues, "As a Republican, I say to my colleagues on this side of the aisle that the Republican Party faces challenges today that is not unlike the challenges it faced by Lincoln back in the day. The Republican Party so successfully met that challenge that it emerged from the Civil War as the champion of a united nation. In addition to being the party which unrelentingly fought loose spending and loose programs. I doubt if the Republican Party could do so simply because I do not believe the American people will uphold any political party that puts political exploitation above the national interests. Surely we Republicans are not so desperate for victory. I do not want to see the Republican Party win that way. While it might be a fleeting victory for the Republican Party, it would be a more lasting defeat for the American people," she says. "Surely it would ultimately be suicide for the Republican Party and the two-party system itself that has protected American leaders' liberties from the dictatorship of a one-party system. You ask me, Amy Klobuchar, what do we need to do? We need to call to the conscience of our comrades in the People's Branch and say, how could you go along with a reconciliation that will put trillions of dollars of debt on our children and our children's children? How could you go along with cutting $800 billion from Medicaid only to give tax cuts to the wealthiest, disproportionately go to the wealthiest? How can you in good conscience, if you're a fiscal hawk, if you're a Christian conservative, how could you hurt the weak to benefit the rich and powerful? That is the answer to your question. The people of the United States of America, all of us, have to stand up and say, no, not on my watch. I'm a Republican, I'm a veteran, I'm a police officer, I'm a firefighter, I'm a teacher. Not in America. We won't allow this. We won't allow this. We won't allow this.
Will the senator yield, the senator from New Jersey yield for question?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I thank my colleague, and I have been listening to this, and a Herculean presentation for hours and hours, and your remarks reflect the urgency of our times, Senator Booker, and I thank you for it. Let me frame the question this way. I hold open to all town hall meetings in every county in my state each year. I've had more than 1,100 of them, and since Donald Trump took office, what we have seen in these town hall meetings is fear and terror, and I might add, record turnouts. You know, I was in a small town in Central Oregon recently, Sisters. We had almost 1,400, people here. And what people asked about, and you've touched on this morning, is of course Medicaid and Social Security, because these are programs involving health care and retirement that are really the connective tissue between the government and our people. And these programs make it possible for people to pay for essentials. They're not going to fancy places. They're buying groceries, they're paying rent, they're buying medicine. We had one separate town hall meeting, I say to my colleague, just with federal employees whose goal is to get out in the woods and help prevent fire in Oregon. I organized this meeting. They too are terrified. They've dedicated their lives to trying to help. Now, we serve the American people. And I'm telling you, I've seen service in action over the last few hours with your reflecting the urgency of our times. Our salaries are paid for by taxpayers, and I'm particularly troubled by the fact that we're getting all these reports that many senators are saying, I'm not going to do town hall meetings. They're on the other side of the aisle. As I said, I've had 1,100 of them, 10 of them so far this year. Seems to me that's refusing to answer to constituents. And you've been here all night, and you're setting a very clear example about what it means to push back against authoritarianism. So just like I have town hall meetings, my question to my friend from New Jersey is, what are you hearing from home? Pretty straightforward question, but it sure as heck is what the times are all about, because people are saying, what are you doing back there? What's important to you? And I talk about town meetings. I had a town hall, I say to my friend during the speech that was made on the floor of the House. I had 30,000 people participating. That's a lot for my small state. So I know what I'm doing, and I think the American people would like to hear a bit about what my colleague is hearing from his state and why it's so important that he's out here mopping his brow today, trying to stay on his feet, making the case for the urgency of our time. What are you hearing?
Thank you, Senator. I'm hearing a lot of fear, a lot of anger. I'm hearing head of hospitals say that this is outrageous, the threats to our hospitals in New Jersey. I'm hearing heads of critical health services tell me what the Medicaid cuts will mean to their organizations. I'm hearing from Catholic priests that are doing extraordinary things in service of their communities. I'm hearing from citizens who are veterans, who got fired from their jobs. I'm hearing from people, as I read letters from people who work in the Social Security agency, and what the chaos that's been created and the lack of the deteriorating service to seniors. I've heard from seniors who are terrified about what's being done to Social Security and how it might affect their lives. I'm hearing demands from our constituents, people demanding, Senator, that we do something about the outrages they're seeing. And I think that when I hear New Jerseyans, by larger and larger numbers, and I'll be back in my state. I know we are planning meetings and a town hall and a lot more this weekend. But I have to say, now more than ever, we need more of it. We need more of it. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I want to elevate those voices of my constituents. I want to tell the stories that my constituents are writing in about, and lift their voices and tell them that they're seen, they're heard. I've been going through section by section, as you pointed out, Social Security, section on healthcare, section on education and the Department of Education and the work that it does. I've been going point by point through. This is the agenda. I didn't know how much of I can get through. But we laid it out. We have binders for each one of these issues. Immigration, we went through. We have housing, the environment, farmers and food, veterans, the corruption that's been normalized by this president, the rule of law, public safety, all of the ways that we know that there is a crisis in our country, and we as a nation need to be more attuned to it and doing more to meet this crisis, to rise up and defend our country, defend our well-being. And all while things are happening that you know. You're the chairman of the Finance Committee, and you have these insights. We've talked about them, about what's about to happen in this reconciliation process. I mean, that's one of the most stunning things. It's almost immediate on this floor. I think we're going to see about the tariffs tomorrow and see how far the president will go, but we do know whatever it is, it's going to affect prices that are going to continue to go up for Americans, as inflation has continued to go up for Americans. As the stock markets continue to go down, as people's 401ks have lost so much money, the uncertainty I'm hearing from businesses in New Jersey, the chaos that they feel about the economy, the consumer confidence in this country has gone way down. If you ask the question, are you better off than you were 71 days ago? Not many Americans would say that they're better off. Their costs are higher, their groceries are higher. They're soon to see everything from car prices to food go higher. Their retirement security is under attack. Their health care is under attack. They're losing their Department of Education. They're less safe from infectious diseases abroad. There's so many things that we have to talk to and try to stop. And you're our leader on the Finance Committee. And years and years ago, but they said, oh, this is too crazy, we can't do this. To try to tell the American people somehow that the trillions of dollars of tax cuts that we're going to give disproportionately to the wealthiest people of all, oh, there's nothing to see here that has a zero impact on the budget, so we can do it through reconciliation. That is the biggest hocus-pocus, manufactured artifice that I've ever seen to obscure the truth in America. That what the Republicans are trying to do is cut massively into health care for Americans in order to give tax cuts to the wealthiest, disproportionately to the wealthiest who don't need it, and to drive up the deficits, making our children and our children's children have a more dangerous economy and higher debt payments to make, debt payments that will skyrocket. higher than any expense the government makes. We are literally about to see something go through reconciliation that threatens to sacrifice our children's future so that the richest of the rich can get richer. And so I know there's a lot of people who are angry, who are worried, who are feeling overwhelmed, who are struggling to make ends meet, but I know of only one way to do this, and I'm trying to do it myself, is to do things differently, to stand up, to speak up, to not act like this is just normal in our country. There's not a president from Eisenhower to Reagan to Bush on the Republican side that could ever imagine a day where in a UN vote we side with Russia and China against the Western democracies that we saved in World War II, that we stormed beaches of Normandy for, that we did the Berlin airlift for, that we did the Marshall Plan for. We designed the world order, and now we're turning our back on it. We designed the rules-based world order, and we're turning our back on those organizations. From trashing NATO to getting out of the World Health Organization to getting out of the group of countries coming together to deal with climate change. We're not leading the planet Earth anymore. Our allies are saying openly they can't trust us. The quotes are unbelievable by our allies. Generations of Americans all know one thing: Russia is our adversary. This principle was reinforced after Russia's brutal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. The American public knows a lot about Putin and his cronies and what they've done to the brave people of Ukraine. Russia has abducted over 19,000 children, taking them from their families and homeland. Russia has targeted civilians, bombing hospitals and schools, including a strike on a children's hospital during the supposed ceasefire negotiations just a few weeks ago. Russian forces have raped and assaulted Ukrainian civilians, and Russia has tortured prisoners of war. One would think, given all the horrors inflicted by Russia, that the United States would continue to treat Russia as the adversary and the pariah that other Western democracies treat it. But that's not what Trump has done. He's done the opposite. On the third anniversary of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, the Trump administration joined Russia and North Korea in voting against a UN resolution condemning the invasion that has killed over 12,000 Ukrainian civilians and injured 30,000. Imagine that. I had the foreign minister of a great ally in NATO in my office looking at me and saying, basically, what the heck? My friend Chris Murphy on the floor, we sit close to each other. He's further up the dais than me in foreign relations, and this stuff is insanity. Here's NBC News. President Donald Trump has said Ukraine, not Russia, started the war. He called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, not Vladimir Putin. He called Zelensky a dictator. Meanwhile, Trump's administration is standing down on a suite of tough anti-Kremlin policies. In just over a month, Trump has executed a startling realignment of American foreign policy, effectively throwing U.S. support behind Moscow and rejecting the tight alliance with Kiev, cultivated by former President Joe Biden. The extraordinary pivot has upended decades of hawkish foreign policy towards Russia that provided a rare area of bipartisan consensus in an increasingly divided nation. Trump's recent moves have drawn international attention, unsettling U.S. alliances, and thrilling conservative populists who favor a turn away from Zelensky. The new posture was put in stark relief on Friday during a tense Oval Office meeting. We all remember this. Between Trump and Zelensky, the leaders clashed in front of the press, raising questions about the future of American support for Kyiv. Alliances and partners around the world are our biggest strength against any U.S. adversary or competitor, from China to Russia to Iran to North Korea. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, but our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand in alliance with those nations that share our values and are bonded to us and are committed to us. In fact, the only time Article 5 in the United Nations, that article that says that if one person in NATO is attacked, everyone is attacked, and they all join together, that one time it happened was 9/11, when our NATO allies stood up with America. And so look at NATO. It's been the bedrock of the international order for 80 years. It was created in 1949 by 12 countries, including the United States, to provide collective security, and in many ways to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. Since then, 20 more countries have joined NATO through 10 rounds of enlargement, bringing the total number of NATO countries to 32. The most recent additions were Sweden in 2024 and Finland in 2023, who applied to join NATO in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine, because those countries are realizing that the authoritarian dictator that Putin is, who threatens his smaller neighbors, those other nations have realized they should be standing with NATO. That we have a principle of collective defense, as I said, enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Collective defense means an attack on one ally is considered an attack against all allies. A strong NATO has made America safer and stronger and more prosperous. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle have recognized this. I've been in this body for 12 years. I've been told by people who I've learned from about foreign policy when I came here as a mayor and leaned on people like Chris Coons and leaned on people like Chris Murphy, leaned on people like John McCain, leaned on people like Lindsey Graham, leaned on people like Senator Rubio. He helped pass a law that enshrined congressional action before the president can withdraw from NATO. That law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. 87 senators voted yes. Senator Rubio, now Secretary of State, said, and I quote, "NATO serves as an essential military alliance that protects shared national interests and enhances America's international presence. Any decision to leave the alliance should be rigorously debated and considered by the U.S. Congress with the input of the American people." 2 weeks ago, though, on March 19th in 2025, in response to news that the Pentagon may give up the role of supreme allied commander in Europe, a position held by an American general since the NATO alliance was formed in 1949, Republican Senator Wicker and Representative Rogers signaled their oppositions in an extraordinarily joint statement warning to Donald Trump that change would, quote, risk undermining American deterrence around the globe. I want to read some of the comments of NATO partners about the damage that has been done in just the last 71 days of Trump's leadership in upending the world order that has helped to keep America strong and stronger and safer and more prosperous. The EU's top diplomat said the free world needs a new leader. Think about that. Think about that. The EU's top diplomat has said in response to Donald Trump that now the free world needs a new leader. Every president of my lifetime was seen as the leader of the free world, and now the rest of the free world, its top diplomat is saying it's time for that to change. The new German chancellor said, "My absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA." He went on to say, "I never thought I would have to say something like this on a television program, but after Donald Trump's statements, it is clear that the Americans, at least this part of the Americans, this administration, are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. Our ancestors saved Europe. Our ancestors stormed beaches in Normandy, paratrooped into Europe, liberated concentration camps. Our ancestors sacrificed blood and treasure for Europe. It turned Germany from one of history's worst despotic states into a global economic power, and a democracy. We were there at the Berlin airlift. We were there for the Marshall Plan. And now Europe is saying it is clear that the Americas, at least that part of the Americas, this administration are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. That is not true. That is not true. And as long as I have breath in my body and blood in my veins, I will join with the other people on both sides of the aisle. God bless you, Roger Wicker, for standing with the understanding that America is the strongest nation in the world, but our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand with our allies from Germany to Japan, from Australia to Iceland, that when our country stands up, we don't bully our neighbors like Canada, we don't threaten our allies like Iceland, like Greenland, we don't threaten smaller, weaker nations like Panama, we don't upend the world order. Donald Trump does not speak for me. He does not speak for the traditions of this body. He doesn't speak for the people that are buried, Americans that are buried in fields in Germany and in France and all over Europe. Here is former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's speech at NATO and the Atlantic Council. On April 4th, 1949, 12 democracies came together in the wake of 2 world wars and the dawn of a new Cold War, and they all remembered, as President Truman put it then, the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. That's what Truman said. They were coming together against the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. You hear that, Putin? And so they vowed to stand together for their collective defense and to safeguard freedom and democracy across Europe and North America. They made a solemn commitment declaring that an armed attack against one ally would be considered an attack against all. Now, that commitment was enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. It was the foundation of what NATO, of NATO, and it still is. And on that bedrock, we have built the strongest and most successful defense alliance in all of human history, and I'll say one of the most prosperous blocs of democratic countries. Throughout the Cold War, NATO deterred Soviet aggression against Western Europe and prevented a Third World War. In the 1990s, NATO used air power to stop ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. And the day after September 11th, 2001, when al-Qaeda terrorists attacked our country, including slamming a plane into the Pentagon not far from here, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in history.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I yield to one of my best friends in the Senate. I yield to one of the smartest guys I know. I yield to the guy who handed me the chairmanship of the committee that oversaw world public health and Africa, and still reminds me that he knows more Swahili than I'll ever know. I yield to the guy who, when he speaks up in the Senate, people on both sides of the aisle listen. I yield to my friend who has real friendships, who when I came to and said, we are seeing the worst famines on the planet Earth, that Joe Biden didn't put enough money into the world feeding programs, he went to another appropriator over there, another friend of ours, Lindsey Graham, and together we got billions of dollars of more that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. You are a prince of a man. You are my friend. You are somebody that is a hero who folks don't know their name in the countries that you have affected with your strength on foreign policy. Dear God, my friend, I yield the floor for a question while retaining the floor.
I ask my friend.
Excuse me, I'm going to say that correctly. I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I do not yield the floor.
I ask my friend and colleague from New Jersey if he is familiar with Psalm 30, verse 5.
Not at this moment.
If not, I offer to repeat it because I think it speaks to this moment. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Now, this is a holy month It is the month of Lent. It is the month of Ramadan. It is the period of reflection preceding Passover. And my question to my colleague is rooted in a scripture in the Torah, in the Psalms, forgive me, known to both of us, one widely engaged in these days. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. This is a reminder both of the possibility of redemption, of the urgency of hope, and of your night-long sacrifice on this floor. Let me ask, if I might, two more questions of my friend and colleague. To my colleague from New Jersey, are you familiar with a front-page story on the Washington Post entitled, "Trump's USAID Cuts Cripple American Response to Myanmar Earthquake," an article running today in the Washington Post?
I have not read the paper to this day, but I
had suspected that that might be the case, given that my colleague from New Jersey has dedicated his night to standing tall and fighting hard to make sure that the people of the United States know what is going on. And I'll share with you just for a moment that it hurt my heart to watch the national evening news last night and see a Chinese humanitarian emergency response team celebrated as they pulled survivors out of the earthquake rubble in Myanmar. It did not hurt my heart that there are Chinese nationals providing emergency relief, but it hurt my heart that exactly those people who are the very best in the world at responding to humanitarian crises, exactly those people had just received termination letters, and their work with USAID had just been suspended. Normally, in every humanitarian crisis I've known in my lifetime, the first in are the men and women of USAID and the U.S. Armed Forces. Whether a tsunami, a tornado, wildfires, or an earthquake, we had world-leading humanitarian response capabilities. And I think it is a tragedy that we have not. I think it is a tragedy, and it is reflected in both this article that I've asked my colleague about and in the response of the world, that we have created an enormous opening for the PRC to come in and do what we previously did so well. Let me ask another question, if I might, of my colleague. Are you familiar with what has just happened to food banks all over our nation in terms of an announcement about impending deliveries of badly needed surplus food? This, I suspect, will be the focus of your future comments on agriculture, but I mention it as something that has impacted my state, and I suspect yours as well.
Well, first of all, I want to stay disciplined. When you ask me a question, to yield for a question, I want to say I yield for a question while retaining the floor. And I want to say to the colleague, I'm familiar with some of this, but if as a part of a question to me and not anything resembling a colloquy, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor if you have another question.
To my colleague, are you familiar with an article, USDA halts millions of dollars worth of deliveries to food banks?
I'm pretty sure I am. I am.
I will simply then ask my colleague a question.
Therefore, if you were going to ask me a question, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
To my colleague, I ask the question, are you familiar with the cuts that have been imposed to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, suspending hundreds of millions of meals to Americans in need, and the justification for that being offered?
I am familiar. I've mentioned it earlier in this last 15 hours. So thank you.
Last question.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
To my colleague from New Jersey, I ask the question, are you familiar with when, whether, and why NATO has invoked Article 5 and how the service and the sacrifice that followed reinforces exactly the point I believe my colleague was beginning to speak to, which is the common cause and the common purpose shown by all of our NATO allies in America's greatest moment of need in recent decades after the attacks of 9/11.
I am very familiar with that. It haunts me that when America was in crisis, I live 11 miles from ground zero,
And to my colleague, are you aware which of our European NATO allies lost per capita the highest number of their soldiers in combat, serving alongside American service members? A nation I visited, a nation whose service members I visited, a nation that is today aggrieved by comments made recently. Are you familiar with our trusted ally, Denmark?
Yes, I am. That country that has shed more blood than any of our allies, side by side, fighting with America, is Canada. Is Canada.
Denmark.
Oh, it's Denmark.
Denmark lost per capita, I believe. Excuse me. Let me simply ask of my colleague one more question.
Thank you very much. I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Is my colleague aware that broadly distributed across our NATO allies is service and sacrifice, including the loss of their troops in combat, and that every single loss in combat was a loss of great service and sacrifice by our NATO allies?
Yes, I am familiar, and I'm grateful for you making those points as we threaten Greenland and Denmark and try to bully them in a way that, with rhetoric that fashions more after the behavior of Vladimir Putin's threatening before the Ukrainian invasion, as opposed to what allies do, who are grateful for shared sacrifice, who are grateful for shared honor, who are grateful for shared prosperity. What is happening right now to me is shameful. How we're treating our allies is unacceptable, and the tariffs that will be imposed will indeed hurt Canada and other NATO allies. But they will hurt us in the long run more, not only in the immediacy of the driving up of prices for Americans. What the president is doing as he turns his back on Republican traditions and American and Democratic traditions, it's going to hurt us more as a nation in the long run, as other countries look to other places for leadership of the free world.
Will my colleague yield for another question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Is my colleague familiar with the testimony of General Jim Mattis, a decorated 4-star Marine Corps general who served as Secretary of Defense in the previous Trump administration, who testified about what the consequences would be if we were to defund development and diplomacy?
I hope that the colleague of mine, who again has been a mentor, a friend on all things foreign policy, my belief is that he's referring to when General Mattis sat before the United States Senate and said very pointedly, if you cut the foreign aid, if you cut organizations like USAID, if you cut the programs of the State Department, then buy me more bullets.
Will my colleague yield for a final question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Does my colleague have an opinion about whether it strengthens or harms America in our national security to have an earned reputation as a nation of compassion, a nation that comes to the aid of those suffering through humanitarian disasters, a nation of compassion that provides health care and access for retirement in decency, a nation that cares for the least of these on the margins of the world and that has a just and inclusive society at home? Does my colleague have an opinion about whether it strengthens or weakens our nation at home and abroad to earn a reputation for compassion and reliability, or instead to deserve a reputation for unreliability and cruelty?
So this is the powerful thing about my friend, who I went with on my first trip to the continent of Africa as a senator. And I remember flying in to Zimbabwe. The leader of that country had passed away. And you always correct me on my pronunciation, so I'm going to try my best. Mnangagwa.
Mnangagwa, yes.
Mnangagwa, thank you, sir.
Mnangagwa.
The alligator, it was his reputation, had taken over as his leadership. And we, this bipartisan merry group of senators, were going there to sit in a unified, bipartisan way and say to this new leader, you need to honor democratic principles, you need to honor free and fair elections, that we want to be your partner, we want to be your friend, but it's time for a new, peaceful, democratic Zimbabwe. And as we landed, I don't know if you remember, he was landing too in the airport, and he was coming from China. He was coming from China, who has different values than we have. In fact, you and I both see now all over the continent of Africa a competition. We come with USAID, we come with PEPFAR, we come with a program called AGOA, helping with economic development. We come with scientists that stand in the breach against the worst infectious diseases. One of the most courageous things I saw Chris Coons do in my life was when the Ebola scare was happening about 8 years ago, and was starting to show up on our shores. You did something that people were afraid to do. You went to Africa to visit with the people from our country that are there fighting Ebola. You had to come in quarantine when you came back to make sure you didn't have it. It was amazing because you were going there to say to the world, I, Chris Coons, Senator for Delaware, here, but America is here. America knows that an infectious disease anywhere is a threat to public health everywhere. America knows that when it comes to the globe, Martin Luther King was right in his spiritual proclamation in the letters from the Birmingham jail that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I have been to where you've been, from Kenya and Tanzania, to traveling with you to Ouagadougou. You used to make me smile when I used to say the capital of Burkina Faso. Ouagadougou, my friend. There's a word I learned from a language, the Bantu language. It basically roughly translates into this: I am because we are. I am because we are. America has learned the power of soft power. General Mattis knew much cheaper investment, much more success. String of successes that we've had in the last 25 years have been with our soft power, not with our 20-year wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. General Mattis knew that. He gave wisdom. He said, do not cut the State Department. Do not cut USAID. They are making an invaluable contribution to fighting terrorism, to fighting instability, to spreading democracy, to fighting infectious diseases, where we go and stand. But now we're shrinking, we're retreating, we're pulling back, we're cutting aid. And when crises are happening like we're seeing in Myanmar right now, we don't even have the personnel to be there to help people. But you know who does? China. And they show up and they leverage influence. You and I know this in the continent of Africa. They're here, take our money, be in debt to us now, and we have control. By the way, we want a military port here, like they have right next to us in Djibouti. The Chinese are playing a long game, and Trump is playing into their hands and weakening our nation, not just against infectious diseases, not just against the global fight against climate change, not just against the economic opportunities that we're missing out on in the continent of Africa. And guess what? If you don't know this, by 2050, 1 out of every 4 people on the planet Earth will live on the continent of Africa. 1 of every 3 working-age people on the planet Earth will be on the continent of Africa. China's playing the long game. Not only critical rare earth minerals, but the economic power of the most populous continent on the planet. And what are we doing with Trump? We're doing Michael Jackson. We're moonwalking away from that continent, saying, China, go ahead. I love you, Chris Coons. I am the ranking member of this subcommittee inspired by you, Chris Coons. And the work that you and me and Lindsey Graham and John McCain did over the last 10 years is being swept away as our allies are saying frightening things that they have to look elsewhere for leadership and not to the people that saved the free world. It is a shame that we're doing to my grandparents' generation. with my grandmother with her war bonds and her victory garden, and my grandfather building bombers at the Willow Run bomber plant in Michigan. All the country came together and sacrificed for the war effort. We saved Europe. We bled and died on that European continent. There are, and you've seen them, these fields of crosses, and you see some Stars of David, and you see some Muslim graves. You see it all. Our American boys died. And yet we still invested in that continent. We still invested with the Marshall Plan. We still invested with the Berlin Airlift. We still stood up to communism. And a great Republican president stood up in front of a Russian autocratic leader and said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And what is Trump going to be remembered for? I really love Vladimir Putin. Zelensky's a dictator. You're my friend. You and I both visit VA halls. And occasionally we meet a World War II veteran. In my state, there are some incredible men that still wear their hat. And if they can, they stand with pride. They are called the greatest generation. And what are we doing to their legacy? What are we doing to their legacy, Chris Coons? I'm going to keep talking unless somebody wants to say, will the senator yield for a question?
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First of all, thank you so much for what you are doing, Senator Booker. You are drawing our nation's attention to what Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Doge are seeking to do to our country, especially the most vulnerable in our society. And you, Senator Booker, you have been a champion for the poor, for the sick, for the disabled, for those most in need throughout your entire life. That is who you are. You are absolutely a champion for those who need help the most. So as we look at what Donald Trump is proposing, to destroy the Department of Education, just to level it, knowing that Title I money goes to the poorest children in Newark, in Boston, so that they can have as close to an equal footing as is possible so that they too can compete to ensure they enjoy the American dream. To gut Medicaid, knowing that there's 338,000 people just in Massachusetts alone who are on disabilities, who need Medicaid in order to deal with those afflictions which their families need a little bit of help to deal with. To begin a process of saying that Social Security is a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And knowing that ultimately they need the billions of dollars for the tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. And they have to get it out of education. They have to get it out of Medicaid. They have to get it out of veterans benefits. They have to get it out of Social Security. We know what their plot is. The plot is to get $2 trillion out of the programs that affect ordinary people in order to have tax breaks for the wealthiest people in our nation. And most of it will come out of health care. It'll come out of Medicaid, ultimately out of Medicare, out of the Affordable Care Act, out of veterans benefits, health care, health care, health care, health care for every family, for the wealthiest in our society who don't need a tax break. The one thing they don't need right now is a tax break, especially when Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Jeff Zuckerberg now control more wealth than the bottom 50% of our nation combined. Do they really need a tax break? I mean, I know the president put him right behind him at his inauguration, but, oh my God, the cabinet sits behind billionaires? The founding fathers are spinning in their graves, thinking about how they've inverted what is supposed to be the way in which our government our country works. So I thank you for your incredible leadership. You are putting the spotlight on what is going wrong in this country right now, this oligarchy seeking to take over our nation. So I thank the senator for what he is doing. It is just so consistent with his whole life, what he stands for on the floor of the Senate today, a conscience for the nation. So can the senator tell the Senate today, the nation, what this could mean if we continue down this path of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Doge for those families who need help the most in our society?
I so appreciate the senator, and I want to tell folks, when I wrote my book, I thought I knew this man here, but I did a lot about environmental justice in my book. I did about a lot of these toxic chemicals out there that are threatening our people. And I came to the Senate one day, so humbled, because I told him I knew you as my colleague. We both got here around the same time. But I had no idea of the kind of things you did in the United States House of Representatives, how many bills that made a difference for people's lives in Boston and in Newark and Camden and Passaic. You are one of the people that, after a few years here, I discovered in 2015, writing my book, how amazing your career is. And now, having served in the Senate about the same amount of time, I am so grateful for you. And you have been so consistent in why you came here, not forgetting the people you've been fighting for your whole career. And so your question is right aligned with that point. It was said earlier about this humanity's biggest fight, humanity's biggest consistent theme, us versus them or just us. I don't like when we pit one group in this country against another group. It's not us versus the billionaires or us versus the Republicans. It's understanding what is best for we the people. How can we create a more perfect union? And I will tell you this right now. We are a union in trouble compared to our global peers. We have higher disease rates, higher diabetes rates, higher cancer rates, higher maternal mortality rates, higher premature birth rates, higher infant mortality rates. There are so many things going on in this country that should not go on. But yet we are a nation of utter abundance. We are a nation of incredible wealth and resources. And we've proven in our past to be a nation of incredible vision. And that's why I don't understand why we are playing so small, why we have a president that is playing so small. It's not coming here like presidents of the past and saying, we together, from Reagan to Clinton to Obama, there's a big challenge, America. We together are going to get into the room and do sausage making, Republicans and Democrats, and we're going to find a way to write great legislation. Whatever you want to say about Joe Biden, he was a big president because he didn't try to do things by executive fiat, or as a quote of Donald Trump's I put here, the primacy of the executive, ignoring our Constitution. You know how many bipartisan bills were hammered out here? I see another dear friend of mine, Mark Warner. You know how many bipartisan bills Mark Warner was at the table for? My senior senator who's chairman of Intelligence. We did bipartisan infrastructure act when Trump in his first term had infrastructure week every other week. We did a chips and science bill. He's trying to claw back the money, but we together, I still remember that skiff, that classified skiff where the whole Senate was there and our national security team and Gina Raimondo put forward the crisis in our country, the vulnerabilities, and we came out of that room, we got into our rooms, and we hammered out a great chips and science bill. Decades went by in this body with doing nothing on gun violence. Decades, and courageous people on the Republican side, friends of mine that surprised me, that stood up like Senator Cornyn and said, we're going to do something. I've got my lines, you've got your lines, but let's find the space in the middle. And we did programs, and if you come to New Jersey, The community violence intervention money is lowering murder rates in places like Newark by over 50%, helping to get it done along with our great law enforcement officers. And the incredible thing about that now is Trump is trying to claw back that money, violating the separation of powers, because we decide how we're spending money in America, not the executive. Read the Constitution. And so you and I both know that a big president would come to here and say, let's do some legislation. But John McCain, and I read it in the middle of the night, but John McCain, it's really important, John McCain, I won't read it, but I'll tell it, voted against the health care last time, the taking away of health care for millions of Americans, and said that's because of the dysfunction of this body that we don't come together and do something bigger and bolder to provide better health care, to bring the ideas from both sides and expand the opportunities for Americans and replace the imperfections of the Affordable Care Act with smarter and better things. Not Donald Trump. He's repeating why the mistakes, but not with the ACA, which affects tens of millions of Americans, with Medicaid, that affects 70 to 100 million Americans. Why? You ask why? Well, we know why. There's two things that this will achieve. Two things. One, as you said it is because he wants to not just renew the Trump tax cuts, but expand them that have disproportionate benefits to the wealthiest. And I wish the wealthiest in the country, names that we know, people like Elon Musk would say, I don't want a tax cut. I wish he would say the truth. I don't need a tax cut. But no, that's one of the reasons. He wants to renew a program that gave disproportionate money, but that's not the only reason. There's a cruelty in what he's doing. It's so offensive. He seems to have no respect for people with disabilities. He made fun of a journalist with a disability once. He seems to have no respect for people who are working hard and struggling but still can't make ends meet. No respect for people that are afraid of his language, of his threats. They think that what he's doing to Social Security might mean they don't have it, that what he's saying to Medicare and Medicaid are lies, because he's got more registered lies than any president of my lifetime. They don't think they can trust this president not to hurt them because he already is. And so I was told by my parents what defines you as a person is not what happens to you, but how you choose to respond. What happens to us as a nation is not what happens to us. They can bomb us from Pearl Harbor to attack us at 9/11. The American character was defined by how we responded to those crises. And yes, there have been major political crises before, but we responded by bending the arc of our nation more towards justice, taking care of more and more people, saying that we belong to each other in America. It is we the people. It is we the people. I see the standing of my friend, Mark Warner. I don't know if he has a question, but I know what I'm told to say if he asks me to yield for a question.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, Mr. President, let me join my friend and colleague from Massachusetts. One, to celebrate the senator from New Jersey's endurance, his willingness to continue to make this case in as clear terms as possible. Not having been here last night at 6:30, I do wonder when he started this speechathon at 6:30 whether the bob and the weave and the move was quite as strong, or was he firmly attached to the podium. The fact that you are going on more than 12 hours now and look like you've got hours ahead and hours before you sleep, and knowing that there are other members who've got a question, including the majority leader. I just want to be brief with mine. You've talked a lot with great passion about the damage done domestically. As chairman of the Intelligence Committee, now vice chairman, I have been aghast at the sloppiness of this administration time after time after time in terms of their treatment of classified information. First 2 weeks of the administration, strangely, a couple hundred CIA agents' identities were revealed on a non-classified chain. These probationary employees, means new employees, the American government had spent a couple $100,000 on each of them. You got to get a security clearance, you got to get them trained. Unfortunately, these folks can't deploy abroad. They can't deploy undercover because their names were carelessly put on an unsecured channel. If you say, well, that was just a one-off. Well, what about a week or so later, the Doge boys, they print a whole list of federal properties that should be for sale. They quickly take it down a few hours later, realizing they once again have screwed up. But in putting up that list, they put on classified dark sites that the American government, again, spends millions of dollars to protect. Or more recently as well, the Doge boys, either ignorantly or maliciously, either one just plain stupid, put out the list of a classified agency, its budget, total head count, again, all classified information. And Senator, one thing I can tell you, and I know you know this as well, if this had happened to a line intelligence officer or a line military officer, there'd be no question. Your butt would be fired. Matter of fact, we got information yesterday there had been a DHS employee who had inadvertently put a journalist on a chat line. Guess what happened? The guy's fired. So when it came to this incident, now called Signalgate, or Signalgate fiasco, where you've got the leading members of this administration debating where and how we should bomb the Houthis, including specific information of who will be hit and when. Senator Booker, I was down in Hampton Roads this weekend. These were the communities that surround the Norfolk Naval Station. Norfolk Naval Station is where the Truman, the aircraft carrier, has been deployed from. It is the aircraft carrier that the flights that attacked the Houthis flew off of. I can tell you one thing, Senator Booker, these people were pissed off that there'd been this level of carelessness about their loved ones that if it had gotten in the wrong hands would have cost American lives. So, Senator Booker, as you put down the litanies of all of the challenges that have been raised by this administration, I'll ask you a simple question. Do you agree that this pattern, not one-off, pattern of sloppiness endangers our national security?
Yes, absolutely, yes. I love that you gave that litany, Senator. I have benefited from your leadership on the Intel Committee. You are one of the people that when things go down on the planet Earth, you're one of the small handful of people with the highest security clearance here, you know, before rank and file senators do. And we've had so many conversations about threat matrices and what our enemies are doing. You've sent me to the SCIF and say, I can't talk to you about this. Go down in the SCIF and ask for the information and help me to fill out my understanding of national security threats. I am stunned by this president. All that I've read in the SCIFs about what Russia is doing to this country, I am stunned and angry by this president and what he is doing to us by cozying up to Putin and turning his back on our allies. But the sloppiness, the unqualified leaders that he's put in place, it has caused us to be more at risk. And the Signalgate, you said it. If that had happened under any other president, Republican or Democrat, whoever controlled the Senate would have hearings. They would want to know, was this pattern in practice? Did these signal conversations happen before and we only know about this one because it's somehow you pulled in a journalist? Well, that's a violation of the law because they're disappearing messages. We're destroying government documents that the executive branch has a legal obligation. And the classified materials, putting it out there, first saying, oh, there was nothing classified about that, lying, and then they put out the actual, said, okay, if there's nothing classified, they release the whole thing. And to the wisdom of people like you, and again, more wisdom and experience at Intel than me, it's clearly that was sensitive, probably classified, but we should be having hearings and accountability. I keep going back to how this document is being undermined and attacked by this president. And one of the powers and responsibilities that we swore to uphold, every one of us swore to uphold this, was that we are to be a check on the administration. Before I yield to the next question from Senator Schumer, I want to talk about Senator Schumer. I just want to say something, get it off my chest. Senator Murphy, we've passed the 15-hour mark. I want to thank Senator Murphy in particular because he's been with me the whole night. He hasn't left my side. And in some ways, the debt's repaid. We passed 15 hours because we called Chuck Schumer 9 years ago. 9 years ago. I remember exactly where I was standing when three of us were on the phone and we asked Chuck to help us for you to take the floor right down there and do a filibuster. We didn't know how long it was going to last, but I committed to you that I would be your aide de camp. 15 hours you stood, Chris Murphy, saying that this nation shouldn't do business as usual for the Pulse massacre. And the leader of the Senate 9 years ago said, I support you guys, go ahead. And so one of the first people I called, Senator Schumer, and talked to about this actually was Murphy. And he did full circle for me and has been with me the whole 15 hours. His debt is paid, but I got fuel in the tank, man. And the only reason you stopped wasn't because you couldn't go on anymore. It was because we got a concession from Mitch McConnell. We got a concession to get 2 votes on common sense gun safety that Republicans had put forward, like universal background checks in the past, but we lost that vote. But in both occasions, 9 years apart, once where Murphy was the principal, and now here we had a leader that said, yeah, how can I help? And so I want to thank Senator Schumer before I suspect he might ask me to yield for a question for being a friend, a partner, and one of the first people I turned to with this idea and that encouraged me to go for it, Cory. And so thank you, Chuck Schumer.
Would the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
And I have 2 questions, frankly, one on Medicaid cuts, which we talked about last night, and one on tariffs. But first, let me say before I get to this question, your strength, your fortitude, your clarity has just been nothing short of amazing. And all of America is paying attention to what you're saying. All of America needs to know there's so many problems, the disastrous actions of this administration in terms of how they're helping only the billionaires and hurting average families. You have brought that forth with such clarity. People from one end of America to the other admire you. Our whole caucus is behind you, and we admire your stamina, your strength, your passion, your intelligence. The list of adjectives could go on. My question first relates to the Medicaid cuts. As we talked about last night, I visited three Republican districts, one in Staten Island, one right on the border of 2 Republican districts in Long Island yesterday, to talk about Medicaid cuts. I went to nursing homes, and it was clear that the Medicaid cuts that are proposed in this proposal, $880 billion in the House, would be devastating. On Staten Island, the nursing home we visited, they love it, Silver Lake Nursing Home, would close. 300 people would lose their jobs, hundreds would be thrown out, and most of them said their children can't take care of them. It's their needs are more advanced. And even some who said their children might be able to take care of them didn't have room in the house, etc. So it's affecting, Staten Island's a middle class, voted for Trump. But we made a plea to their congresswoman to not vote for any bill that had these Medicaid cuts and the tax breaks for billionaires. And a lot of the people there were it was bipartisan. There were both parties there. We estimated that about 18,000 people total would lose their jobs with these Medicaid cuts, creating a recession on Staten Island. We estimated the harm that would have caused. And so this was devastating. Same thing on Long Island. Again, Republican areas with Republican Congress people who hold the balance. If those 3 Congress people alone would say, I'm not voting for a bill that cuts Medicaid to give tax breaks for the billionaires, the bill would fail. So, and I know that you in New Jersey and my colleagues in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and elsewhere are doing the same thing, congressmen and senators, and I've talked to Leader Jeffries, and he's doing the same with his folks. So my question to you is very simple. If these people in New Jersey, in New York, across America, are kicked out of nursing homes, of assisted living facilities, of healthcare facilities, what would they do? How could they, and how does the senator, with his passion and everything else, feel when the only reason they're doing this is give tax breaks to the wealthiest of Americans? Would you please answer my question, sir?
Yes, I will, Leader Schumer. I earlier, or late last night rather, I read dozens and dozens and dozens of letters from terrified people. The stories were heartbreaking as people rendered their pride and gave us insights into the more painful aspects of their lives. I got emotional over one about a person talking about being diagnosed with Parkinson's and know that the disease we get more and more debilitating, like I saw with my father, and demand more and more help, and she was paranoid that the burden on her family, that they couldn't afford it. I had this one amazing letter about a person that said they were the sandwich generation, 2 90-something-year-old parents they were taking care of, and 2 adult men, children with disabilities. And for all of these people, like you saw in the nursing homes, Medicaid wasn't a plus or some kind of abundance heaped upon their lives. It helped them keep the fragile financial world they were living in stable. And then not just an $880 billion cut, Senator Schumer, but even just a half of that or a quarter of that would cut services that would pull apart their whole lives, their ability to care for their loved ones, their ability to still work. One person just said, just the transportation we get through Medicaid for my disabled child is the link that holds it all together. And callously and cruelly, they're talking about this, not in any kind of insightful way, not any kind of, well, here's we can make it more efficient and actually help keep, none of that kind of thought or logic of bringing in experts, because we read page after page after page of rural hospital leaders, of urban hospital leaders, and more and more and more. So your question is clearly that it is this crazy scheme right now to expand the Trump tax cuts that overwhelmingly, disproportionately go to the wealthiest of us in America who need not our help, that would still yet expand the deficit by trillions of dollars, which means your children, and I know how proud of a grandfather you are, your grandchildren would have to pay for that debt. They're stealing from your grandchildren so that the wealthiest amongst us could get bigger tax cuts, and at the same time taking away medical coverage from the most vulnerable. What is that? It's not who we are. It's not who we are, America. And as much as people, thousands descended on this to save the ACA, Medicaid affects millions and millions of more people. Wake up. They're coming after a vital program for American expectant mothers, for American children, for American disabled, for the seniors like the ones you visited. No, I have one more thing to get off my chest, sir, and this is a little lighter. You heaped so many kind things on me. I don't know if you realize that never before in the history of America has a man from Brooklyn said so many complimentary things about a man from Newark.
But I would remind my colleague that we are both New York Giants fans.
Who play where? In New Jersey. This is not a colloquy. I hold the floor. I do not yield. Brooklyn stole the Nets. It's an injustice from Newark. They stole the Nets. I do not yield the floor for a rebuttal. And the Giants and the Jets play in New Jersey. There's only one football team in New York, and that's the Bills. I do not yield, but I do love and respect. But when I got the floor, I don't have to yield. This is the one time in my life I get the last word with my much more senior, much wiser friend and senator who's
My colleague, I do have another question on an unrelated subject.
On a different
on an
subject?
Unrelated subject.
Okay, unrelated.
But I will say,
as long as he
Bills.
gives me that commitment, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
First, let me say before I ask my question, go Bills. Second, given the 15 hours which you've shown such amazing strength of an all-American athlete who could probably, given what you've shown tonight, be a star on our Giants, but so I will not even try to rebut where the Giants are. But I will ask you this question, second, and just going back to before I get to tariffs, one of the leading hospitals in New York told me if there were only a 20% cut of Medicaid, less deep than they showed, that they would close. They're the only cancer care place in the Bronx, 1.3 million people, and they give great care. They're the only one. They would close. So the devastation of these cuts, the American people should realize, is just enormous from one end of the country to the other. In middle-class communities and upper-middle-class communities like Long Island, middle-class like Staten Island, poor communities like the Bronx. But on tariffs, let me ask a question. So here we are, right on the edge of April 2nd. Today's April Fool's Day, but the tariffs that the President is proposing, unfortunately, are not part of an April Fool's trick. They're real and they're devastating. And my question to my colleague, with these tariffs, which is estimated would cost the American family $6,000 more on average, would raise costs on everything across the board, and would throw devastation into our economy. Look at the stock market. It goes down when Trump's serious about tariffs, and it goes up when he says, well, maybe he's not so serious. And with the chaos that is caused, so businesses, which love certainty, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses, need certainty. So my questions are these. Does the great senator and great Giants fan from New Jersey agree that prices could go way up, all the way up to as much as $6,000? And does he agree that the chaos from Trump's tariffs is discombobulating the economy in very serious ways? And again, does he agree that the reason that they seem to be doing this, they count the revenues? This guy Navarro seems to have no sense of reality, and yet he seems to be in charge. And they count the revenues to help them get more tax cuts for the wealthy. Almost everything they do, including tariffs, it seems to me, is aimed at getting those tax cuts for the wealthy, which, God bless the wealthy, as I've heard you say last night when we spoke, we're not against people who make a lot of money. God bless them, but they don't need a tax break.
No, they don't.
They should realize the beauty of America helped them become or stay billionaires. The money we invested in education, in roads, in schools, and helping kids get food makes a better workforce. So my question to my colleague on these tariffs, A, does he agree that it could raise the price on an average family thousands of dollars? It's estimated $6,000. Does he agree that the chaos caused by Trump's on again, off again, this country, this much, that much, this product, that product, is hurting the economy and hurting business people do their jobs? And does he agree that it seems the motivation is tax breaks for the wealthiest people?
So
Could you please answer my question?
I will,
yield
Leader
back
Schumer.
to him.
I will. So you and I both know that in 72 days now, it's the next day, the 72 days that Trump has been in office, he has caused havoc on the American economy, especially given the economy he inherited. Inflation is up. Prices are up. Consumer confidence is down. The stock market and people's 401ks and retirement plans are down. He continues to do things to rattle confidence, to raise prices, and to hurt the people that can afford these things, to hurt average Americans who find housing prices too high and it difficult to make ends meet. Every time, and I've looked at the tariffs throughout history. In fact, one of my friends sent me this really funny clip I hope somebody will put up for me from, I think it was Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where he was talking about tariffs and was like, Bueller, the reality is, or maybe it was another movie, I'm mixing it up. It shows my pop, what's that?
Entitled after
Thank you.
15
Right
hours.
now, but the tariffs haven't worked out for Republican presidents who tried them during the Depression. The evidence is here. Learn from our history.
Does my colleague remember the names of Smoot and Hawley?
Smoot and Hawley. Yes, sir. I definitely remember those names from high school history. God bless you, Mr. Al Gore and Ms. Saru. So yes, what he's going to do tomorrow is going to rattle the markets. What he's going to do tomorrow is raise prices for Americans. What he's going to do tomorrow is lie to folks and say that this is something that China will pay or whomever will pay, when actually it's the American consumers that will pay with higher prices and more economic insecurity. This man, I tell you this quote that Frederick Douglass once said. This I do remember. He said, "The limits of tyranny is prescribed by the endurance of those who are oppressed." How much more will we take of this? How much more will we as America say, cut our Medicaid to give tax cuts to the billionaires? Take the Affordable Care Act and take away tax credits, take away enrollment support. Hey, come after Social Security, cut thousands of people, make customer service get worse, as said the Wall Street Journal. How much more of these indignities will we take as he turns our back on our allies? How much more? How much more of a person that is doing tyrannical things as he takes our Constitution and continues to trash it, as he's running into judge after judge after judge that's trying to stop him, but we've already seen that he wants to ignore judges, or if he gets real rulings he doesn't like, he trashes the judges. And even the Chief Justice appointed by a Republican says to him, no, this is not right, this is not who we are, this is not how we do things in America. How much more can we endure before we, in a collective chorus of conviction in our country, say enough is enough? Enough is enough. You're not going to get away with this.
I thank the gentleman for his fortitude, his strength, and the crystalline brilliance by which he has shown the American people the huge dangers that face them with this Trump, Doge, Musk administration. I yield the floor back to my colleague in New Jersey.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Massachusetts, but I think you have to ask him for a question.
Mr. President, will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I am very grateful to the senator from New Jersey for coming to the floor for such an extended period of time to give voice to all of those around this country whose voices evidently are not heard by the Republicans in the United States Congress. And I wanted to ask a question for the 73 million people who are beneficiaries of the Social Security system and for their families, for the people whose grandma is getting Social Security, for the people whose cousin, whose dad died, who is getting Social Security benefits, about what's happening right now between Donald Trump and Elon Musk, our current co-presidents, and what they're trying to do to the Social Security system. So I start this question with just a basic observation. Social Security is not charity. It is not something we give away to those who are less fortunate, and we do this out of the goodness of our hearts. Social Security is a contract that people who work in America pay into the system for all of their working lives, and when the time comes that they retire or something happens to them and they are not able to do that work, that they can count on the Social Security system and the payments that they are legally entitled to. I want to underscore here legally. Now, if America wanted to change that contract, the place they have to go is right here, to Congress.
Yes.
They have to come to the United States Senate, or they have to go to the House of Representatives, and they have to say, we actually want to change benefits for Social Security recipients. And by the way, that has happened dozens and dozens of times in our history up through the late 1980s, where we made adjustments in the Social Security benefits. For example, for the fact that people lived longer, for the fact that people worked longer. And so we made minor adjustments in the system. We also made adjustments to make sure that there were cost of living changes in how much Social Security would pay out. So anyone who wants to change the benefits that people are legally entitled to has to come here to Congress and make that happen. But it appears that Elon Musk and Donald Trump have tried to figure out an end run. And the end run is to say, okay, we can't directly change benefits, but what we can do is we can effectively cut off benefits. Now, how can they do that? Well, one way is fire all the people who help people get their Social Security benefits. And think of it this way. Someone who wants to collect Social Security, let's just say at age 66, they decide, okay, I'm ready. It's time for me to retire. I can't do this anymore. I want to collect my Social Security benefits. And they try to fill out the form. Turns out it gets rejected. There's a number off somewhere in the system. Somebody's got a confusion over what the name is or where somebody worked, or an employer from decades back failed to fill out the right form. So now there's a problem in the system. So what does the person do? Well, first they might try calling. But if you fired the people who answered the phones, that's not going to work. Okay, so what's the next thing you do? You go to your local Social Security office. Oh, but if they've closed the Social Security office near you, that's not going to work. So what do? You go to the Social Security office that you can find. 2 hours away, 3 hours away, 4 hours away. Finally, get to that Social Security office, and when you get there, if they fired most of the people, you may encounter, 2 people working the desk to help straighten out problems, and a line that's 50 people long. By the way, these come from real stories. People are telling what's happening out there. So, by the time the day is over, our example here hasn't even made it to the front of the line. So, doesn't get the question answered, doesn't get the problem resolved. Has to go back home again, has to find somebody who can maybe take him to the Social Security office that's hours away and start this process over and over and over. If this person, let's just say, for example, takes 3 months to get this problem ultimately resolved by the Social Security Administration, they don't get the money. That money is lost. It just simply is gone. They do not get the money they are legally entitled to, and they have no right to go back and collect it, even pointing out that it was Social Security's error. So failure to correct these errors, or to give people an opportunity to correct these errors, is effectively the same as having cut their benefits. And you do that for 1% of the people, drive up your error rate. You do that for 5% of the people. You do that for 10% of the folks who are getting Social Security. And man, those cuts really start to add up. They really start to add up for the people whose benefits are cut. They really start to add up for Donald Trump and for Elon Musk. But let's look at another possibility here, and that is just simply delay. Checks don't go out on time. When checks don't go out on time, then the promise that people relied on, that check would come on the 3rd of the month, that's what they count on for rent, that's what they count on to put groceries on the table, that's what they count on to support themselves, it's gone. So maybe they'll get the check next month. Another billionaire Republican, Howard Lutnick, said, don't worry about it. His mother-in-law would simply count on the fact that they'd straighten the problem out, and maybe next month she would get her payment. I suppose if your son-in-law is a billionaire, you can count on the fact that somebody will make sure your rent gets covered and groceries on the table. But for the 70 million Americans relying on that check coming in every month, not so clear what you're going to do. So what do you do? Do you borrow money to make rent? Do you call on relatives if you've got them? Who do you go to be able to make it to the end of this month? And if the problem persists, to the next month and the next month? Where do you go? That is, in my view, as much a benefit cut as Congress having voted to say we're just going to give a 10% across-the-board cut to everyone who receives Social Security benefits. There are a lot of ways to cut benefits, and breaking your promise to 73 million Americans is a benefit cut. It is not a legal benefit cut, but it is an effective benefit cut. And I admire the senator from New Jersey for being here today to speak out for those Americans who face these kinds of cuts and have no recourse. I admire him for standing up and saying to the Republicans who won't go do town halls, who won't go out and meet with these people and listen to them, listen to their concerns, listen to their fears, listen to their stories about what happens as thousands and thousands more Social Security employees are fired, and correcting problems, straightening out your benefits gets harder and more out of reach for more and more Americans. That is what we face right now. So the question that I want to pose to the senator from New Jersey is this. At a time when Donald Trump and Elon Musk are looking for an indirect way to cut Social Security benefits, and let's just pause here, if I can, to say, why?
Yes.
Why go out of your
Yes.
way to cut Social Security benefits? Come on now. 73 million Americans rely on this. This has been the backbone of America's promise to its own people, that you did the work, you put in the money, and now you're entitled to the benefit on the other side. Why are they doing this? Because they want to reduce the amount of money that is available for Social Security and instead take that money over so that they can advance tax cuts for billionaires and billionaire corporations. They're just trying to grease the skids here for the billionaires to get even richer and ask the 73 million Americans who rely on Social Security to pay for it out of their own hides. So the question I have for the senator from New Jersey is, when Elon Musk and Donald Trump are determined to try to use a backdoor way to cut Social Security benefits, A, are they acting legally? And B, how do we put a stop to this?
Yeah, amen, amen. You know, Reverend Warnock was here earlier and was preaching and quoting scripture, but you are preaching a gospel of truth, my friend, from a civic gospel that speaks to the cares and the concerns of the American hope and the American dream and the American Constitution, because you and I both know the answer to the question. I have to say, for folks who are watching, she is the great senator from Massachusetts, but she used to be a professor in New Jersey. She was a Rutgers professor. I was listening to her way before I got to the Senate, when she was fighting for the CFPB, when she was fighting so people would not be taken advantage, was establishing the first ever agency whose sole purpose is to stand up to big banks, to big corporate powers, and defend people, an institution that got billions and billions of dollars back into the pockets of the American consumer. And what did Donald Trump and Doge do to an institution that we set up in Congress in a bipartisan way? They did something that is against the Constitution and went after to hack it to pieces so that it's no more. But add insult to injury, down here, we just had a vote on overdraft fees that was stunning to me because there was just no defense of it. It was a clear thing. Some of the big banks said, you know what, we don't need those usury fees, it's actually wrong. Some of the big banks just stood up and said, did the right thing, but a handful of others were still taking advantage of people, and this Senate got to vote, which side are you on? And we failed. So your question is right. You detail